act, but the only reply he received was that she was their mother, and they were her children, and they ought to put her to death. On reaching the grave, the mother sat down, when they all, including children, grandchildren, relations, and friends, took an affectionate leave of her. A rope, made of twisted tapa, barkcloth, was then passed twice around her neck by her sons, who took hold of it, and strangled her, after which she was put into her grave, with the usual ceremonies. They returned to feast and mourn, after which she was entirely forgotten as though she had not existed. 683 wives strangled or buried alive at their husbands' funerals. Again, wives were often strangled, or buried alive, at the funeral of their husbands, and generally at their own instance. Such scenes were frequently witnessed by white residents in the old days. On one occasion, a Mr. David Whitby drove away the murderers, rescued the woman, and carried her to his own house, where she was resuscitated. But far from feeling grateful for her preservation, she loaded him with reproaches and ever afterwards manifested the most deadly hatred towards him. That women should desire to accompany their husbands in death is by no means strange when it is considered that it is one of the articles of their belief, that in this way alone can they reach the realms of bliss, and she who meets her death with the greatest devotedness will become the favorite wife in the abode of spirits. The sacrifice is not, however, always voluntary, but, when a woman refuses to be strangled, her relations often compel her to submit. This they do from interested motives, for, by her death, her connections become entitled to the property of her husband. Even a delay is made a matter of reproach. Thus, at the funeral of the late King Ulivu, which was witnessed by Mr. Cargill, his 5 wives and a daughter were strangled. The principal wife delayed the ceremony, by taking leave of those around her, whereupon Tanoa, the present king, chid her. The victim was his own aunt, and he assisted in putting the rope around her neck, and strangling her, a service he is said to have rendered on a former occasion to his own mother. 684 In the case of men who were drowned at sea or killed and eaten by enemies in war, their wives were sacrificed in the usual way. Thus when Mbithi, the pride of Somosomo, was lost at sea, 17 of his wives were destroyed, and after the news of a massacre of the Namina people at Viwa in 1839 80 women were strangled to accompany the spirits of their murdered husbands. 685 Human grass for the grave. The bodies of women who were put to death for this purpose were regularly laid at the bottom of the grave to serve as a cushion for the dead husband to lie upon. In this capacity they were called grass, though, being compared to the dried grass which in Fijian houses used to be thickly strewn on the floors and covered with mats. 686 On this point, however, a nice distinction was observed. While wives were commonly sacrificed at the death of their husbands, in order to be spread like grass in their graves, it does not transpire that husbands were ever sacrificed at the death of their wives for the sake of serving as grass to their dead spouses in the grave. The great truth that all flesh is grass appears to have been understood by the Fijians as applicable chiefly to the flesh of women. Sometimes a man's mother was strangled as well as his wives. Thus Ngavindi, a young chief of Lasaka, was laid in the grave with a wife at his side, his mother at his feet, and a servant not far off. However, men as well as women were killed to follow their masters to the far country. The confidential companion of a chief was expected as a matter of common decency to die with his lord, and if he shirked the duty, he fell in the public esteem. When Mbithi, a chief of high rank and greatly esteemed in Mathwada, died in the year 1840, not only his wife but 5 men with their wives were strangled to form the floor of his grave. They were laid on a layer of mats, and the body of the chief was stretched upon them. 687 There used to be a family in Vanua Levu which enjoyed the high privilege of supplying a hale man to be buried with the king of Fiji on every occasion of a royal decease. It was quite necessary that the man should be hale and hearty, for it was his business to grapple with the Fijian Cerberus in the other world, while His Majesty slipped past into the abode of bliss. 688 Sacrifices of foreskins and fingers in honor of the dead. Circumcision performed on a lad as a propitiatory sacrifice to save the life of his father or father's brother. The rite of circumcision followed by a licentious orgy. A curious sacrifice offered in honor of a dead chief consisted in the foreskins of all the boys who had arrived at a suitable age. The lads were circumcised on purpose to furnish them. Many boys had their little fingers chopped off on the same occasion, and the severed foreskins and fingers were placed in the chief's grave. When this bloody rite had been performed, the chief's relatives presented young breadfruit trees to the mutilated boys, whose friends were bound to cultivate them till the boys could do it for themselves. 689 Women as well as boys had their fingers cut off in mourning. We read of a case when after the death of a king of Fiji 60 fingers were amputated and being each inserted in a slit reed were stuck along the eaves of the king's house. 690 why foreskins and fingers were buried with a dead chief or stuck up on the roof of his house, we are not informed, and it is not easy to divine. Apparently we must suppose that, when they were buried with the body, they were thought to be of some assistance to the departed spirit in the land of souls. At all events, it deserves to be noted that according to a very good authority a similar sacrifice of foreskins used to be made not only for the dead but for the living. When a man of note was dangerously ill, a family council would be held, at which it might be agreed that a circumcision should take place as a propitiatory measure. Notice having been given to the priests, an uncircumcised lad, the sick man's own son or the son of one of his brothers, was then taken by his kinsmen to the Veil Tambu or God's house, and there presented as a sorrow, or offering of atonement, in order that his father or father's brother might be made whole. His escort at the same time made a present of valuable property at the shrine and promised much more in future, should their prayers be answered. The present and the promises were graciously received by the priest, who appointed a day on which the operation was to be performed. In the meantime, no food might be taken from the plantations except what was absolutely required for daily use, no pigs or fowls might be killed, and no coconuts plucked from the trees. Everything, in short, was put under a strict taboo, all was set apart for the great feast which was to follow the performance of the rite. On the day appointed the son or nephew of the sick chief was circumcised, and with him a number of other lads whose friends had agreed to take advantage of the occasion. Their foreskins, stuck in the cleft of a split reed, were taken to the sacred enclosure, Nanga, and presented to the chief priest, who, holding the reeds in his hand, offered them to the ancestral gods and prayed for the sick man's recovery. Then followed a great feast, which ushered in a period of indescribable revelry and license. All distinctions of property were for the time being suspended. Men and women arrayed themselves in all manner of fantastic garbs, addressed one another in the foulest language, and practiced unmentionable abominations openly in the public square of the town. The nearest relationships, even that of own brother and sister, seemed to be no bar to the general license, the extent of which was indicated by the expressive phrase of an old Nandi chief, who said, "While it lasts, we are just like the pigs." This feasting and orgy might be kept up for several days, after which the ordinary restraints of society and the common decencies of life were observed once more. The rights of private property were again respected, the abandoned revelers and debauches settled down into staid married couples, and brothers and sisters, in accordance with the regular Fijian etiquette, might not so much as speak to one another. It should be added that these extravagances in connection with the rite of circumcision appear to have been practiced only in certain districts of Viti Levu, the largest of the Fijian islands, where they were always associated with the sacred stone enclosures which went by the name of Nanga. 691 These orgies were apparently associated with the worship of the dead, to whom offerings were made in the Nanga or sacred enclosure of stones. The meaning of such orgies is very obscure, but from what we know of the savage and his ways we may fairly assume that they were no mere outbursts of unbridled passion, but that in the minds of those who practiced them they had a definite significance and served a definite purpose. The one thing that seems fairly clear about them is that in some way they were associated with the worship or propitiation of the dead. At all events, we are told on good authority that the Nanga, or sacred enclosure of stones, in which the severed foreskins were offered, was the sacred place where the ancestral spirits are to be found by their worshippers, and thither offerings are taken on all occasions when their aid is to be invoked. Every member of the Nanga has the privilege of approaching the ancestors at any time. When sickness visits himself or his kinsfolk, when he wishes to invoke the aid of the spirits to avert calamity or to secure prosperity, or when he deems it advisable to present a thank offering, he may enter the Nanga with proper reverence and deposit on the dividing wall his whale's tooth, or bundle of cloth, or dish of toothsome meals so highly prized by the elders, and therefore by the ancestors whose living representatives they are, or he may drag into the sacred Nanga his fattened pig, or pile up there his offering of the choicest yams. And, having thus recommended himself to the dead, he may invoke their powerful aid, or express his thankfulness for the benefits they have conferred, and beg for a continuance of their goodwill. 692 The first fruits of the yam harvest were presented with great ceremony to the ancestors in the Nanga before the bulk of the crop was dug for the people's use, and no man might taste of the new yams until the presentation had been made. The yams so offered were piled up in the sacred enclosure and left to rot there. If anyone were impious enough to appropriate them to his own use, it was believed that he would be smitten with madness. Great feasts were held at the presentation of the first fruits, and the sacred enclosure itself was often spoken of as the mbaki or harvest. 693 Periodical initiation of young men in the Nanga. But the most characteristic and perhaps the most important of the rites performed in the Nanga or sacred stone enclosure was the periodical initiation of young men, who by participation in the ceremony were admitted to the full privileges of manhood. According to one account, the ceremony of initiation was performed as a rule only once in 2 years. According to another account, it was observed annually in October or November, when the Ndrala tree, Erythrina, was in flower. The flowering of the tree marked the beginning of the Fijian year, hence the novices who were initiated at this season bore the title of Vilavu, that is, New Year's men. As a preparation for the feasts which attended the ceremony, enormous quantities of yams were garnered and placed under a strict taboo, pigs were fattened in large numbers, and bales of native cloth stored on the tie beams of the house roofs. Spears of many patterns and curiously carved clubs were also provided against the festival. On the day appointed, the initiated men went first into the sacred enclosure and made their offerings, the chief priest having opened the proceedings by libation and prayer. The heads of the novices were clean-shaven, and their beards, if they had any, were also removed. Then each youth was swathed in long rolls of native cloth, and taking a spear in one hand and a club in the other, he marched with his comrades, similarly swathed and armed, in procession into the sacred enclosure, though not into its inner compartment, the Holy of Holies. The procession was headed by a priest bearing his carved staff of office, and it was received on the holy ground by the initiates, who sat chanting a song in a deep murmuring tone, which occasionally swelled to a considerable volume of sound and was thought to represent the muffled roar of the surf breaking on a faraway coral reef. On entering the enclosure, the youths threw down their weapons before them, and with the help of the initiated men divested themselves of the huge folds of native cloth in which they were enveloped, each man revolving slowly on his axis, while his attendant pulled at the bandage and gathered in the slack. The weapons and the cloth were the offerings presented by the novices to the ancestral spirits for the purpose of rendering themselves acceptable to these powerful beings. The offerings were repeated in like manner on 4 successive days, and as each youth was merely, as it were, the central roller of a great bale of cloth, the amount of cloth offered was considerable. It was all put away, with the spears and clubs, in the sacred storehouse by the initiated men. A feast concluded each day and was prolonged far into the night. Ceremony of Death and Resurrection. On the 5th day, the last and greatest of the festival, the heads of the young men were shaven again and their bodies swathed in the largest and best rolls of cloth. Then, taking their choicest weapons in their hands, they followed their leader as before into the sacred enclosure. But the outer compartment of the holy place, where on the previous days they had been received by the grand chorus of initiated men, was now silent and deserted. The procession stopped. A dead silence prevailed. Suddenly from the forest a harsh scream of many parrots broke forth, and then followed a mysterious booming sound which filled the souls of the novices with awe. But now the priest moves slowly forward and leads the train of trembling novices for the first time into the inner shrine, the Holy of Holies, the Nanga Tambu Tambu. Here a dreadful spectacle meets their startled gaze. In the background sits the high priest, regarding them with a stony stare, and between him and them lie a row of dead men, covered with blood, their bodies seemingly cut open and their entrails protruding. The leader steps over them one by one, and the awestruck youths follow him until they stand in a row before the high priest, their very souls harrowed by his awful glare. Suddenly he utters a great yell, and at the cry the dead men start to their feet, and run down to the river to cleanse themselves from the blood and filth with which they are besmeared. They are initiated men, who represent the departed ancestors for the occasion, and the blood and entrails are those of many pigs that have been slaughtered for that night's revelry. The screams of the parrots and the mysterious booming sound were produced by a concealed orchestra, who screeched appropriately in blue blasts on bamboo trumpets, the mouths of which were partially immersed in water. Sacrament of Food and Water. The dead men having come to life again, the novices offered their weapons and the bales of native cloth in which they were swathed. These were accordingly removed to the storehouse and the young men were made to sit down in front of it. Then the high priest, cheered perhaps by the sight of the offerings, unbent the starched dignity of his demeanor. Skipping from side to side he cried in stridulous tones, "Where are the people of my enclosure? Are they gone to Tongalivo? Are they gone to the deep sea?" He had not called long when an answer rang out from the river in a deep-mouthed song, and soon the singers came in view moving rhythmically to the music of their solemn chant. Singing they filed in and took their places in front of the young men, then silence ensued. After that there entered 4 old men of the highest order of initiates. The first bore a cooked yam carefully wrapped in leaves so that no part of it should touch the hands of the bearer, the second carried a piece of baked pork similarly enveloped, the third held a drinking cup of coconut shell or earthenware filled with water and wrapped round with native cloth, and the fourth bore a napkin of the same material. Thereupon the first elder passed along the row of novices putting the end of the yam into each of their mouths, and as he did so each of them nibbled a morsel of the sacred food. The second elder did the same with the sacred pork, the third elder followed with the holy water, with which each novice merely wetted his lips, and the rear was brought up by the fourth elder, who wiped all their mouths with his napkin. Then the high priest or one of the elders addressed the young men, warning them solemnly against the sacrilege of divulging to the profane any of the high mysteries they had seen and heard, and threatening all such traitors with the vengeance of the gods. Presentation of the pig. That ceremony being over, all the junior initiated men, Luanai Nanga, came forward, and each man presented to the novices a yam and a piece of nearly raw pork, whereupon the young men took the food and went away to cook it for eating. When the evening twilight had fallen, a huge pig, which had been specially set aside at a former festival, was dragged into the sacred enclosure and there presented to the novices, together with other swine, if they should be needed to furnish a plenteous repast. Acceptance of the novices by the ancestral spirits. The novices were now accepted members of the Nanga, qualified to take their place among the men of the community, though still only on probation. As children, their childhood being indicated by their shaven heads, they were presented to the ancestors, and their acceptance was notified by what, looking at the matter from the native standpoint, we might, without irreverence, almost call the sacrament of food and water, too sacred even for the elders' hands to touch. This acceptance was acknowledged and confirmed on the part of all the Luanai Nanga, junior initiated men, by their gift of food, and it was finally ratified by the presentation of the sacred pig. In like manner, on the birth of an infant, its father acknowledges it as legitimate, and otherwise acceptable, by a gift of food, and his kinsfolk formally signify approval and confirmation of his decision on the part of the clan by similar presentations. The initiation followed by a period of sexual license. Sacred pigs. Next morning the women, their hair dyed red and wearing waistbands of hibiscus or other fiber, came to the sacred enclosure and crawled through it on hands and knees into the Holy of Holies, where the elders were singing their solemn chant. The high priest then dipped his hands into the water of the sacred bowl and prayed to the ancestral spirits for the mothers and for their children. After that the women crawled back on hands and feet the way they had come, singing as they went and creeping over certain mounds of earth which had been thrown up for the purpose in the sacred enclosure. When they emerged from the holy ground, the men and women addressed each other in the vilest language, such as on ordinary occasions would be violently resented, and thenceforth to the close of the ceremonies some days later very great, indeed almost unlimited, license prevailed between the sexes. During these days a number of pigs were consecrated to serve for the next ceremony. The animals were deemed sacred, and had the run of the fleshpots in the villages in which they were kept. Indeed they were held in the greatest reverence. To kill one, except for sacrifice at the rites in the Nanga, would have been a sacrilege which the Fijian mind refused to contemplate, and on the other hand to feed the holy swine was an act of piety. Men might be seen throwing down basketfuls of food before the snouts of the worshipful pigs, and at the same time calling the attention of the ancestral spirits to the meritorious deed. "Take knowledge of me," they would cry, "ye who lie buried, our heads. I am feeding this pig of yours." Finally, all the men who had taken part in the ceremonies bathed together in the river, carefully cleansing themselves from every particle of the black paint with which they had been bedaubed. When the novices, now novices no more, emerged from the water, the high priest, standing on the river bank, preached to them an eloquent sermon on the duties and responsibilities which devolved on them in their new position. 694 The intention of the initiatory rite seems to be to introduce the young men to the ancestral spirits. The drama of death and resurrection. The Fijian rites of initiation seem to have been imported by Melanesian immigrants from the West. The general intention of these initiatory rites appears to be, as Mr. Fison has said in the words which I have quoted, to introduce the young men to the ancestral spirits at their sanctuary, to incorporate them, so to say, in the great community which embraces all adult members of the tribe, whether living or dead. At all events, this interpretation fits in very well with the prayers which are offered to the souls of departed kinsfolk on these occasions, and it is supported by the analogy of the New Guinea initiatory rites which I described in former lectures, for in these rites, as I pointed out, the initiation of the youths is closely associated with the conceptions of death and the dead, The main feature in the ritual consisting indeed of a simulation of death and subsequent resurrection. It is, therefore, significant that the very same simulation figures prominently in the Fijian ceremony, nay, it would seem to be the very pivot on which the whole ritual revolves. Yet there is an obvious and important difference between the drama of death and resurrection as it is enacted in New Guinea and in Fiji, for whereas in New Guinea it is the novices who pretend to die and come to life again, in Fiji the pretense is carried out by initiated men who represent the ancestors, while the novices merely look on with horror and amazement at the awe-inspiring spectacle. Of the two forms of ritual, the New Guinea one is probably truer to the original purpose of the rite, which seems to have been to enable the novices to put off the old, or rather the young, man and to put on a higher form of existence by participating in the marvelous powers and privileges of the mighty dead. And if such was really the intention of the ceremony, it is obvious that it was better effected by compelling the young communicants, as we may call them, to die and rise from the dead in their own persons than by obliging them to assist as mere passive spectators at a dramatic performance of death and resurrection. Yet in spite of this difference between the two rituals, the general resemblance between them is near enough to justify us in conjecturing that there may be a genetic connection between the one and the other. The conjecture is confirmed, first, by the very limited and definite area of Fiji in which these initiatory rites were practiced, and, second, by the equally definite tradition of their origin. With regard to the first of these points, the Nanga or sacred stone enclosure with its characteristic rites was known only to certain tribes, who occupied a comparatively small area, a bare third of the island of Viti Levu. These tribes are the Niuloa, Batusila, Mbatiwai, and Navatukia. They all seem to have spread eastward and southward from a place of origin in the western mountain district. Their physical type is pure Melanesian, with fewer traces of Polynesian admixture than can be detected in the tribes on the coast. 695. Hence it is natural to inquire whether the ritual of the Nanga may not have been imported into Fiji by Melanesian immigrants from the west. The question appears to be answered in the affirmative by native tradition. "This is the word of our fathers concerning the Nanga," said an old Wainimola greybeard to Mr. Fyson. "Long, long ago their fathers were ignorant of it, but one day two strangers were found sitting in the Rara, public square, and they said they had come up from the sea to give them the Nanga. They were little men, and very dark-skinned, and one of them had his face and bust painted red, while the other was painted black. Whether these two were gods or men our fathers did not tell us, but it was they who taught our people the Nanga. This was in the old times when our fathers were living in another land, not in this place, for we are strangers here. Our fathers fled hither from Navosa in a great war which arose among them, and when they came there was no Nanga in the land. So they built one of their own after the fashion of that which they left behind them. Here," says Mr. Basil Thompson, "we have the earliest tradition of missionary enterprise in the Pacific. I do not doubt that the two sooty-skinned little men were castaways driven eastward by one of those strong westerly gales that have been known to last for 3 weeks at a time. By Fijian custom the lives of all castaways were forfeit, but the pretense to supernatural powers would have saved men full of the religious rites of their Melanesian home, and would have assured them a hearing. The Wainimola tribes can name 6 generations since they settled in their present home, and therefore the introduction of the Nanga cannot have been less than 2 centuries ago. During that time it has overspread 1/3 of the large island. The general license associated with the ritual of the Nanga may be a temporary revival of primitive communism. A very remarkable feature in the Nanga ritual consists in the temporary license accorded to the sexes and the suspension of proprietary rights in general. What is the meaning of this curious and to the civilized mind revolting custom? Here again the most probable, though merely conjectural, answer is furnished by Mr. Fyson. "We cannot for a moment believe," he says, "that it is a mere licentious outbreak, without an underlying meaning in purpose. It is part of a religious rite, and is supposed to be acceptable to the ancestors. But why should it be acceptable to them unless it were in accordance with their own practice in the faraway past? There may be another solution of this difficult problem, but I confess myself unable to find any other which will cover all the corroborating facts." 696. In other words, Mr. Fyson supposes that in the sexual license and suspension of the rights of private property which characterize these festivals we have a reminiscence of a time when women and property were held in common by the community, and the motive for temporarily resuscitating these obsolete customs was a wish to propitiate the ancestral spirits, who were thought to be gratified by witnessing a revival of that primitive communism which they themselves had practiced in the flesh so long ago. Truly a religious revival of a remarkable kind. Description of the Nanga or sacred enclosure of stones. To conclude this part of my subject, I will briefly describe the construction of a Nanga or sacred stone enclosure, as it used to exist in Fiji. At the present day, only ruins of these structures are to be seen, but by an observation of the ruins and a comparison of the traditions which still survive among the natives on the subject, it is possible to reconstruct one of them with a fair degree of exactness. A Nanga has been described as an open-air temple, and the description is just. It consisted of a rough parallelogram enclosed by flat stones set upright and embedded endwise in the earth. The length of the enclosure thus formed was about 100 feet and its breadth about 50 feet. The upright stones which form the outer walls are from 18 inches to 3 feet high, but as they do not always touch, they may be described as alignments rather than walls. The long walls or alignments run east and west, the short ones north and south, but the orientation is not very exact. At the eastern end are two pyramidal heaps of stones, about 5 feet high, with square sloping sides and flat tops. The narrow passage between them is the main entrance into the sacred enclosure. Internally, the structure was divided into 3 separate enclosures or compartments by 2 crosswalls of stone running north and south. These compartments, taking them from east to west, were called respectively the Little Nanga, the Great Nanga, and the Sacred Nanga or Holy of Holies, Nanga Tambu Tambu. The partition walls between them were built solid of stones, with battering sides, to a height of 5 feet, and in the middle of each there was an opening to allow the worshippers to pass from one compartment to another. Trees, such as the candlenut and the red-leaved dracaena, and odoriferous shrubs were planted round the enclosure, and outside of it, to the west of the Holy of Holies, was a bell-roofed hut called Vale Tambu, the sacred house or temple. The sacred kava bowl stood in the Holy of Holies. 697 It is said that when the 2 traditionary founders of the Nanga in Fiji were about to erect the first structure of that name in their new home, the chief priest poured a libation of kava to the ancestral gods, and, calling upon those who died long ago by name, he prayed that the people of the tribe, both old and young, might live before them. 698 Comparison of the Nanga with the cromlechs and other megalithic monuments of Europe. The sacred enclosures of stones which I have described have been compared to the alignments of stones at Karnak in Brittany and Marivalli on Dartmoor, and it has been suggested that in the olden time these ancient European monuments may have witnessed religious rites like those which were till lately performed in the rude open-air temples of Fiji. 699 If there is any truth in the suggestion, which I mention for what it is worth, it would furnish another argument in favor of the view that our European cromlechs and other megalithic monuments were erected specially for the worship of the dead. The mortuary character of Stonehenge, for example, is at least suggested by the burial mounds which cluster thick around and within sight of it. About 300 such tombs have been counted within a radius of 3 miles, while the rest of the country in the neighborhood is comparatively free from them. 700 Footnote 678, Return, T.H. Williams, Fiji and the Fijians, 2nd edition, London, 1860, I 242 square. Footnote 679, Return, Charles Wilkes, Narrative of the United States Exploring Expedition, New Edition, New York, 1851, 3. 86, Footnote 680, Return, John Jackson's Narrative, in Captain J. E. Erskine's Journal of a Cruise Among the Islands of the Western Pacific, London, 1853, pages 475 to 477. The narrator, John Jackson, was an English seaman who resided alone among the Fijians for nearly 2 years and learned their language. Footnote 681, Return, C.H. Wilkes, Opposite 3. 96, Footnote 682, Return, United States Exploring Expedition, Ethnology and Philology, by H. Hale, Philadelphia, 1846, page 65. Compare Captain J. E. Erskine, opposite page 248. It would also seem that a belief in the resurrection of the body, in the exact condition in which it leaves the world, is one of the causes that induce, in many instances, a desire for death in the vigor of manhood, rather than in the decrepitude of old age. T.H. Williams, opposite I 183. The heathen notion is, that, as they die, such will their condition be in another world, hence their desire to escape extreme infirmity. Footnote 683, Return, C.H. Wilkes, opposite 3. 94 square. Compare T.H. Williams, Fiji and the Fijians, I 183 to 186, Lorimer Fison, Tales from Old Fiji, London, 1904, pages 25. Square. Footnote 684, Return, C.H. Wilkes, opposite 3. 96, compare T.H. Williams, opposite I 188 square, 193 SQQ. 200 to 202, Lorimer Fison, opposite pages 25. Square footnote 685, return, T.H. Williams, opposite I, 200. Footnote 686, return, T.H. Williams, opposite I 189, Lorimer Fison, opposite page 16. Footnote 687, return, T.H. Williams, opposite I 189. Footnote 688, return, T.H. Williams, opposite I 197. Footnote 689, return, C.H. Wilkes, opposite 3. 100, Williams also says, opposite I 167, that the proper time for performing the rite of circumcision was after the death of a chief, and he tells us that many rude games attend it. Blindfolded youths strike at thin vessels of water hung from the branch of a tree. At Lakemba, the men arm themselves with branches of the coconut, and carry on a sham fight. At Ono, they wrestle. At Mbao, they fill up small stones from the end of a bamboo with sufficient force to make the person hit wince again. On Vanua Levu, there is a mock siege. Footnote 690, return, T.H. Williams, opposite I 198. Footnote 691, return, Reverend Lorimer Fison, the Nanga, or Sacred Stone Enclosure, of Wainemala, Fiji, Journal of the Anthropological Institute, 14. 1885, pages 27 square. On the other hand, Mr. Basil Thomson's inquiries, made at a later date, did not confirm Mr. Fison's statement that the rite of circumcision was practiced as a propitiation to recover a chief from sickness. I was assured, he says, on the contrary, that while offerings were certainly made in the Nanga for the recovery of the sick, every youth was circumcised as a matter of routine, and that the rite was in no way connected with sacrifice for the sick. Basil Thomson, The Fijians, pages 156 square. However, Mr. Fison was a very careful and accurate inquirer, and his testimony is not to be lightly set aside. Footnote 692, return, Rev. Lorimer Fison, the Nanga, or Sacred Stone Enclosure, of Wainemala, Fiji, Journal of the Anthropological Institute, 14. 1885, page 26. Compare Basil Thomson, The Fijians, page 147. The Nanga was the bed of the ancestors, that is, the spot where their descendants might hold communion with them. The Mbaki were the rites celebrated in the Nanga, whether of initiating the youths, or of presenting the first fruits, or of recovering the sick, or of winning charms against wounds in battle. Footnote 693, return, Reverend Lorimer Fison, opposite page 27. Footnote 694, return, Reverend Lorimer Fison, the Nanga, or Sacred Stone Enclosure, of Wainemala, Fiji, Journal of the Anthropological Institute, 14. 1885, pages 14 to 26. The Nanga and its rites have also been described by Mr. A. Ebi Josk, the Nanga of Viti Levu, International's Archive for Ethnography, 2. 1889, pages 254 to 266, and Mr. Basil Thomson, The Fijians, pages 146 to 156. As to the interval between the initiatory ceremonies, Mr. Fison tells us that it was normally 2 years, but he adds, this period, however, is not necessarily restricted to 2 years. There are always a number of youths who are growing to the proper age, and the length of the interval depends upon the decision of the elders. Whenever they judge that there is a sufficient number of youths ready for admission, a Nanga is appointed to be held, and thus the interval may be longer or shorter, according to the supply of novices, opposite page 19. According to Mr. Basil Thomson, the rites were celebrated annually. Mr. Fison's evidence as to the gross license which prevailed between the sexes after the admission of the women to the sacred enclosure is confirmed by Mr. Basil Thomson, who says, amongst other things, that a native of Mbao, who lived for some years near the Nanga, assured me that the visit of the women to the Nanga resulted in temporary promiscuity, all taboos were defied, and relations who could not speak to one another by customary law committed incest, opposite page 154. Footnote 695, return, Reverend Lorimer Fison, the Nanga, or Sacred Stone Enclosure, of Wainemala, Fiji, Journal of the Anthropological Institute, 14. 1885, pages 14 SQQ. Basil Thomson, The Fijians, pages 147, 149. Footnote 696, return, Reverend Lorimer Fison, opposite page 30. Footnote 697, return, Reverend Lorimer Fison, opposite pages 15, 17, with Playdite Basil Thomson, The Fijians, pages 147 square. Mr. Fison had not seen a Nanga, his description is based on information received from natives. Mr. Basil Thomson visited several of these structures and found them so alike that one description would serve for all. He speaks of only two inner compartments, which he calls the Holy of Holies, Nanga Tambu Tambu, and the middle Nanga, Loma Inai Nanga, but the latter name appears to imply a third compartment, which is explicitly mentioned and named by Mr. Fison. The bell-shaped hut or temple to the west of the sacred enclosure is not noticed by Mr. Thomson. Footnote 698, return, Reverend Lorimer Fison, opposite page 17. Footnote 699, return, Basil Thomson, The Fijians, page 147. Footnote 700, return, as to these monuments see Sir John Lubbock, Lord Avebury, Prehistoric Times, 5th edition, London, 1890, page 127. Lecture XX The Belief in Immortality Among the Natives of Eastern Melanesia, Fiji, concluded, Worship of Ancestors in Fiji. In the last lecture I described the rites of ancestor worship which in certain parts of Fiji used to be celebrated at the sacred enclosures of stones known as nangas. But the worship of ancestral spirits was by no means confined to the comparatively small area in Fiji where such sacred enclosures were erected, nor were these open-air temples the only structures where the homage of the living was paid to the dead. On the contrary, we are told by one who knew the Fijians in the old heathen days that among them as soon as beloved parents expire, they take their place amongst the family gods. Bears, or temples, are erected to their memory, and offerings deposited either on their graves or on rudely constructed altars, near stages, in the form of tables, the legs of which are driven into the ground, and the top of which is covered with pieces of native cloth. The construction of these altars is identical with that observed by Turner in Tanna, and only differs in its inferior finish from the altars formerly erected in Tahiti and the adjacent islands. The offerings, consisting of the choicest articles of food, are left exposed to wind and weather, and firmly believed by the mass of Fijians to be consumed by the spirits of departed friends and relations, but, if not eaten by animals, they are often stolen by the more enlightened class of their countrymen, and even some of the foreigners do not disdain occasionally to help themselves freely to them. However, it is not only on tombs or on altars that offerings are made. Often, when the natives eat or drink anything, they throw portions of it away, stating them to be for their departed ancestors. I remember ordering a young chief to empty a bowl containing kava, which he did, muttering to himself, "There, father, is some kava for you. Protect me from illness or breaking any of my limbs whilst in the mountains." 701 Fijian notion of divinity. Two classes of gods, namely, gods strictly so-called, and deified men. The native word expressive of divinity is kalu, which, while used to denote the people's highest notion of a god, is also constantly heard as a qualificative of anything great or marvelous, or, according to Hazelwood's dictionary, anything superlative, whether good or bad. Often the word sinks into a mere exclamation, or becomes an expression of flattery. "You are a kalu," or, "your countrymen are gods," is often uttered by the natives, when hearing of the triumphs of art among civilized nations. 702 The Fijians distinguished two classes of gods: first, Kalaviu, literally root gods, that is, gods strictly so-called, and second, Kalayalo, literally, soul gods, that is, deified mortals. Gods of the first class were supposed to be absolutely eternal. Gods of the second class, though raised far above mere humanity, were thought nevertheless to be subject to human passions and wants, to accidents, and even to death. These latter were the spirits of departed chiefs, heroes, and friends. Admission into their number was easy, and anyone might secure his own apotheosis who could ensure the services of someone to act as his representative and priest after his death. 703 However, though the Fijians admitted the distinction between the two classes of gods in theory, they would seem to have confused them in practice. Thus we are informed by an early authority that they have superior and inferior gods and goddesses, more general and local deities, and, were it not an obvious contradiction, we should say they have gods human, and gods divine, for they have some gods who were gods originally, and some who were originally men. It is impossible to ascertain with any degree of probability how many gods the Fijians have, as any man who can distinguish himself in murdering his fellowmen may certainly secure to himself deification after death. Their friends are also sometimes deified and invoked. I have heard them invoke their friends who have been drowned at sea. I need not advert to the absurdity of praying to those who could not save themselves from a watery grave. Tuakilakila, the chief of Soma Somo, offered Mr. Hunt a preferment of this sort. "If you die first," said he, "I shall make you my god." In fact, there appears to be no certain line of demarcation between departed spirits and gods, nor between gods and living men, for many of the priests and old chiefs are considered as sacred persons, and not a few of them will also claim to themselves the right of divinity. "I am a god," Tuakilakila would sometimes say, and he believed it too. They were not merely the words of his lips, he believed he was something above a mere man. 704 writers on Fiji have given us lists of some of the principal gods of the first class, 705 who were supposed never to have been men, but in their account of the religious ritual they do not distinguish between the worship which was paid to such deities and that which was paid to deified men. Accordingly, we may infer that the ritual was practically the same, and in the sequel I shall assume that what is told us of the worship of gods in general holds good of the worship of deified men in particular. The Fijian Temple, Beret. Every Fijian town had at least one beret or temple, many of them had several. Significantly enough, the spot where a chief had been killed was sometimes chosen for the site of a temple. The structure of these edifices was somewhat peculiar. Each of them was built on the top of a mound, which was raised to the height of from 3 to 20 feet above the ground and faced on its sloping sides with dry rubble work of stone. The ascent to the temple was by a thick plank, the upper surface of which was cut into notched steps. The proportions of the sacred edifice itself were inelegant, if not uncouth, its height being nearly twice as great as its breadth at the base. The roof was high-pitched, the ridgepole was covered with white shells, Ovula cyprea, and projected 3 or 4 feet at each end. For the most part, each temple had 2 doors and a fireplace in the center. From some temples it was not lawful to throw out the ashes, however much they might accumulate, until the end of the year, which fell in November. The furniture consisted of a few boxes, mats, several large clay jars, and many drinking vessels. A temple might also contain images, which, though highly esteemed as ornaments and held sacred, were not worshipped as idols. From the roof depended a long piece of white bark cloth. It was carried down the angle so as to hang before the corner post and lie on the floor. This cloth formed the path down which the god was believed to pass in order to enter and inspire his priest. It marked the holy place which few but he dared to approach. However, the temples were by no means dedicated exclusively to the use of religion. Each of them served also as a council chamber and town hall. There the chiefs lounged for hours together, their strangers were entertained, and there the head persons of the village might even sleep. 706 In some parts of Viti Levu the dead were sometimes buried in the temples, that the wind might not disturb, nor the rain fall upon them, and in order that the living might have the satisfaction of lying near their departed friends. A child of high rank having died under the charge of the Queen of Somosomo, the little body was placed in a box and hung from the tie beam of the principal temple. For some months afterwards the daintiest food was brought daily to the dead child, the bearers approaching with the utmost respect and clapping their hands when the ghost was thought to have finished his meal, just as a chief's retainers used to do when he had done eating. 707 Worship at the temples. Temples were often unoccupied for months and allowed to fall into ruins, until the chief had some request to make to the god, when the necessary repairs were first carried out. No regular worship was maintained, no habitual reverence was displayed at the shrines. The principle of fear, we are told, seemed to be the only motive of religious observances, and it was artfully fomented by the priests, through whom alone the people had access to the gods when they desired to supplicate the favor of the divine beings. The prayers were naturally accompanied by offerings, which in matters of importance comprised large quantities of food, together with whale's teeth. In lesser affairs a tooth, club, mat, or spear sufficed. Of the food brought by the worshippers, part was dedicated to the god, but as usual he only ate the soul of it, the substance being consumed by the priest and old men, the remainder furnished a feast of which all might partake. 708 The priests. The office of priest, bet, was usually hereditary, but when a priest died without male heirs, a cunning fellow, ambitious of enjoying the sacred character and of living in idleness, would sometimes simulate the convulsive frenzy, which passed for a symptom of inspiration, and if he succeeded in the imposture would be inducted into the vacant benefice. Every chief had his priest, with whom he usually lived on a very good footing, the two playing into each other's hands and working the oracle for their mutual benefit. The people were grossly superstitious, and there were few of their affairs in which the priest had not a hand. His influence over them was great. In his own district he passed for the representative of the deity. Indeed, according to an early missionary, the natives seldom distinguished the idea of the god from that of his minister, who was viewed by them with a reverence that almost amounted to deification. 709 Oracles given by the priest under the inspiration of the god. Paroxysm of inspiration. The principal duty of the priest was to reveal to men the will of the god, and this he always did through the direct inspiration of the deity. The revelation was usually made in response to an inquiry or a prayer. The supplicant asked, it might be, for a good crop of yams or taro, for showers of rain, for protection in battle, for a safe voyage, or for a storm to drive canoes ashore, so that the supplicant might rob, murder, and eat the castaways. To lend force to one or other of these pious prayers, the worshipper brought a whale's tooth to the temple and presented it to the priest. The man of God might have had word of his coming in time to throw himself into an appropriate attitude. He might, for example, be seen lying on the floor near the sacred corner, plunged in a profound meditation. On the entrance of the inquirer, the priest would rouse himself so far as to get up and then seat himself with his back to the white cloth, down which the deity was expected to slide into the medium's body. Having received the whale's tooth, he would abstract his mind from all worldly matters and contemplate the tooth for some time with rapt attention. Presently he began to tremble, his limbs twitched, his features were distorted. These symptoms, the visible manifestation of the entrance of the spirit into him, gradually increased in violence till his whole frame was convulsed and shook as with a strong fit of ague, his veins swelled, the circulation of the blood was quickened. The man was now possessed and inspired by the god, his own human personality was for a time in abeyance, all that he said and did in the paroxysm passed for the words and acts of the indwelling deity. Shrill cries of Koyo! Koyo! It is I! It is I, filled the air, proclaiming the actual presence of the powerful spirit in the vessel of flesh and blood. In giving the oracular response, the priest's eyes protruded from their sockets and rolled as in a frenzy, his voice rose into a squeak, his face was pallid, his lips livid, his breathing depressed, his whole appearance that of a furious madman. At last sweat burst from every pore, tears gushed from his eyes, the strain on the organism was visibly relieved, and the symptoms gradually abated. Then he would look round with a vacant stare, the god within him would cry, I depart, and the man would announce the departure of the spirit by throwing himself on his mat or striking the ground with his club, while blasts on a shell trumpet conveyed to those at a distance the tidings that the deity had withdrawn from mortal sight into the world invisible. 710 I have seen, says Mr. Lorimer Fison, this possession, and a horrible sight it is. In one case, after the fit was over, for some time the man's muscles and nerves twitched and quivered in an extraordinary way. He was naked except for his breechclout, and on his naked breast little snakes seemed to be wriggling for a moment or two beneath his skin, disappearing and then suddenly reappearing in another part of his chest. When the meat, which we may translate priest for want of a better word, is seized by the possession, the god within him calls out his own name in a stridulous tone, it is I. Ketuvir, or some other name. At the next possession some other ancestor may declare himself. 711 specimens of the oracular utterances of Fijian gods. From this last description of an eyewitness we learn that the spirit which possessed a priest and spoke through him was often believed to be that of a dead ancestor. Some of the inspired utterances of these prophets have been recorded. Here are specimens of Fijian inspiration. Speaking in the name of the great god Ndengi, who was worshipped in the form of a serpent, the priest said, Great Fiji is my small club. Moimbala is the head, Kamba is the handle. If I step on Moimbala, I shall sink it into the sea, whilst Kamba shall rise to the sky. If I step on Kamba, it will be lost in the sea, whilst Moimbala would rise into the skies. Yes, Viti Levu is my small war club. I can turn it as I please. I can turn it upside down. Again, speaking by the mouth of a priest, the god Tangiri Anima once made the following observations, I and Kambanavanua only are gods. I preside over wars, and do as I please with sickness. But it is difficult for me to come here, as the foreign god fills the place. If I attempt to descend by that pillar, I find it preoccupied by the foreign god. If I try another pillar, I find it the same. However, we too are fighting the foreign god, and if we are victorious, we will save the woman. I will save the woman. She will eat food today. Had I been sent for yesterday, she would have eaten then, and so on. The woman, about whose case the deity was consulted and whom he announced his fixed intention of saving, died a few hours afterwards. 712 human sacrifices in Fiji. Ferocious and inveterate cannibals themselves, the Fijians naturally assumed that their gods were so too, hence human flesh was a common offering, indeed the most valued of all. 713 formal human sacrifices were frequent. The victims were usually taken from a distant tribe, and when war and violence failed to supply the demand, recourse was sometimes had to negotiation. However obtained, the victims destined for sacrifice were often kept for a time and fattened to make them better eating. Then, tightly bound in a sitting posture, they were placed on hot stones in one of the usual ovens, and being covered over with leaves and earth were roasted alive, while the spectators roared with laughter at the writhings and contortions of the victims in their agony. When their struggles ceased and the bodies were judged to be done to a nicety, they were raked out of the oven, their faces painted black, and so carried to the temple, where they were presented to the gods, only, however, to be afterwards removed, cut up, and devoured by the people. 714 human sacrifices offered when a king's house was built or a great new canoe launched. However, roasting alive in ovens was not the only way in which men and women were made away with in the service of religion. When a king's house was built, men were buried alive in the holes dug to receive the posts. They were compelled to clasp the posts in their arms, and then the earth was shoveled over them and rammed down. And when a large new canoe was launched, it was hauled down to the sea over the bodies of living men, who were pinioned and laid out at intervals on the beach to serve as rollers on which the great vessel glided smoothly into the water, leaving a row of mangled corpses behind. The theory of both these modes of sacrifice was explained by the Fijians to an Englishman who witnessed them. I will quote their explanation in his words. They said in answer to the questions I put respecting the people being buried alive with the posts, that a house or palace of a king was just like a king's canoe. If the canoe was not hauled over men, as rollers, she would not be expected to float long, and in like manner the palace could not stand long if people were not to sit down and continually hold the posts up. But I said, how could they hold the posts up after they were dead? They said, if they sacrificed their lives endeavoring to hold the posts in their right position to their superiors Turanga Kaina Kalu, chiefs and god, that the virtue of the sacrifice would instigate the gods to uphold the house after they were dead, and that they were honored by being considered adequate to such a noble task. 715 Apparently the Fijians imagined that the souls of the dead men would somehow strengthen the souls of the houses and canoes and so prolong the lives of these useful objects, for it is to be remembered that according to Fijian theology houses and canoes as well as men and women were provided with immortal souls. High estimation in which murder was held by the Fijians. Perhaps the same theory of immortality partially accounts for the high honor in which the Fijian held the act of murder and for the admiration which he bestowed on all murderers. Shedding of blood, we are told, to him is no crime, but a glory. Whoever may be the victim, whether noble or vulgar, old or young, man, woman, or child, whether slain in war, or butchered by treachery, to be somehow an acknowledged murderer is the object of the Fijians' restless ambition. 716 It was customary throughout Fiji to give honorary names to such as had clubbed to death a human being, of any age or either sex, during a war. The new epithet was given with the complimentary prefix Koroi. Mr. Williams once asked a man why he was called Koroi. Because, he replied, I, with several other men, found some women and children in a cave, drew them out and clubbed them, and then was consecrated. 717 Mr. Fison learned from another stout young warrior that he had earned the honorable distinction of Koroi by lying in wait among the mangrove bushes at the waterside and killing a miserable old woman of a hostile tribe, as she crept along the mudflats seeking for shellfish. The man would have been equally honored, adds Mr. Fison, if his victim had been a child. The hero of such an exploit, for 2 or 3 days after killing his man or woman, was allowed to besmear his face and bust with a mixture of lampblack and oil which differed from the common black war paint. Decorated with this badge of honor he strutted proudly through the town, the cynosure of all eyes, an object of envy to his fellows and of tender interest to the girls. The old men shouted approval after him, the women would lullalu admiringly as he passed by, and the boys looked up to him as a superior being whose noble deeds they thirsted to emulate. Higher titles of honor still were bestowed on such as had slain their 10, or 20, or 30, and Mr. Fison tells us of a chief whose admiring countrymen had to compound all these titles into one in order to set forth his superlative claims to glory. A man who had never killed anybody was of very little account in this life, and he received the penalty due to his sin in the life hereafter. For in the spirit land the ghost of such a poor-spirited wretch was sentenced to what the Fijians regarded as the most degrading of all punishments, to beat a heap of muck with his bloodless club. 718 Ceremony of consecrating a manslayer. The temporary restrictions laid on a manslayer were probably dictated by a fear of his victim's ghost. The ceremony of consecrating a manslayer was elaborate. He was anointed with red oil from the hair of his head to the soles of his feet, and when he had been thus incarnadined he exchanged clubs with the spectators, who believed that their weapons acquired a mysterious virtue by passing through his holy hands. Afterwards the Anointed One, attended by the king and elders, solemnly stalked down to the sea and wetted the soles of his feet in the water. Then the whole company returned to the town, while the shell trumpet sounded and the men raised a peculiar hoot. Custom required that a hut should be built in which the anointed man and his companions must pass the next 3 nights, during which the hero might not lie down, but had to sleep as he sat. All that time he might not change his barkcloth garment, nor wash the red paint away from his body, nor enter a house in which there was a woman. 719 The reason for observing these curious restrictions is not mentioned, but in the light of similar practices, some of which have been noticed in these lectures, 720 we may conjecture that they were dictated by a fear of the victim's ghost, who among savages generally haunts his slayer and will do him a mischief, if he gets a chance. As it is especially in dreams that the naturally incensed spirit finds his opportunity, we can perhaps understand why the slayer might not lie down for the first 3 nights after the slaughter. The wrath of the ghost would then be at its hottest, and if he spied his murderer stretched in slumber on the ground, the temptation to take an unfair advantage of him might have been too strong to be resisted. But when his anger had had time to cool down or he had departed for his long home, as ghosts generally do after a reasonable time, the precautions taken to baffle his vengeance might be safely relaxed. Perhaps, as I have already hinted, the reverence which the Fijians felt for any man who had taken a human life, or at all events the life of an enemy, may have partly sprung from a belief that the slayer increased his own strength and valor either by subjugating the ghost of his victim and employing it as his henchman, or perhaps rather by simply absorbing in some occult fashion the vital energy of the slain. This view is confirmed by the permission given to the killer to assume the name of the killed, whenever his victim was a man of distinguished rank, 721 for by taking the name he, according to an opinion common among savages, assumed the personality of his namesake. Other funeral customs based on a fear of the ghost. The same fear of the ghost of the recently departed which manifested itself, if my interpretation of the customs is right, in the treatment of manslayers, seems to have imprinted itself, though in a more attenuated form, on some of the practices observed by Fijian mourners after a natural, not a violent, death. Persons who have handled a corpse forbidden to touch food. Seclusion of grave diggers. Thus all the persons who had handled a corpse were forbidden to touch anything for some time afterwards. In particular they were strictly debarred from touching their food with their hands, their victuals were brought to them by others, and they were fed like infants by attendants or obliged to pick up their food with their mouths from the ground. The time during which this burdensome restriction lasted was different according to the rank of the deceased. In the case of great chiefs it lasted from 2 to 10 months, in the case of a petty chief it did not exceed 1 month, and in the case of a common person a taboo of not more than 4 days sufficed. When a chief's principal wife did not follow him to the other world by being strangled or buried alive, she might not touch her own food with her hands for 3 months. When the mourners grew tired of being fed like infants or feeding themselves like dogs, they sent word to the head chief and he let them know that he would remove the taboo whenever they pleased. Accordingly they sent him presents of pigs and other provisions, which he shared among the people. Then the tabooed persons went into a stream and washed themselves. After that they caught some animal, such as a pig or a turtle, and wiped their hands on it, and the animal thereupon became sacred to the chief. Thus the taboo was removed, and the men were free once more to work, to feed themselves, and to live with their wives. Lazy and idle fellows willingly undertook the duty of waiting on the dead, as it relieved them for some time from the painful necessity of earning their own bread. 722 The reason why such persons might not touch food with their hands was probably a fear of the ghost or at all events of the infection of death. The ghost or the infection might be clinging to their hands and might so be transferred from them to their food with fatal effects. In Great Fiji not everyone might dig a chief's grave. The office was hereditary in a certain clan. After the funeral the grave digger was shut up in a house and painted black from head to foot. When he had to make a short excursion, he covered himself with a large mantle of painted native cloth and was supposed to be invisible. His food was brought to the house after dark by silent bearers, who placed it just within the doorway. His seclusion might last for a long time. 723 It was probably intended to screen him from the ghost. Hair cropped and finger joints cut off in mourning. The usual outward sign of mourning was to crop the hair or beard, or very rarely both. Some people merely made bald the crown of the head. Indeed the Fijians were too vain of their hair to part with it lightly, and to conceal the loss which custom demanded of them on these occasions they used to wear wigs, some of which were very skillfully made. The practice of cutting off finger joints in mourning has already been mentioned. One early authority affirms and another denies that joints of the little toes were similarly amputated by the living as a mark of sorrow for the dead. So common was the practice of lopping off the little fingers in mourning that till recently few of the older natives could be found who had their hands intact. Most of them indeed had lost the little fingers of both hands. There was a Fijian saying that the fourth finger cried itself hoarse in vain for its absent mate, droga whale. The mutilation was usually confined to the relations of the deceased, unless he happened to be one of the highest chiefs. However, the severed joints were often sent by poor people to wealthy families in mourning, who never failed to reward the senders for so delicate a mark of sympathy. Female mourners burned their skin into blisters by applying lighted rolls of barkcloth to various parts of their bodies. The brands so produced might be seen on their arms, shoulders, necks, and breasts. 724 During the mourning for a king, people fasted till evening for 10 or 20 days. The coast for miles was tabooed and no one might fish there. The nuts also were made sacred. Some people, in token of grief for a bereavement, would abstain from fish, fruit, or other pleasant food for months together. Others would dress in leaves instead of in cloth. 725 Men whipped by women in time of mourning for a chief. Though the motive for these observances is not mentioned, we may suppose that they were intended to soothe and please the ghost by testifying to the sorrow felt by the survivors at his decease. It is more doubtful whether the same explanation would apply to another custom which the Fijians used to observe in mourning. During 10 days after a death, while the soul of a deceased chief was thought to be still lingering in or near his body, all the women of the town provided themselves with long whips, knotted with shells, and applied them with great vigor to the bodies of the men, raising wheals and inflicting bloody wounds, while the men retorted by flirting pellets of clay from splinters of bamboo. 726 According to Mr. Williams, this ceremony was performed on the 10th day or earlier, and he adds, I have seen grave personages, not accustomed to move quickly, flying with all possible speed before a company of such women. Sometimes the men retaliate by bespattering their assailants with mud, but they use no violence, as it seems to be a day on which they are bound to succumb. 727 As the soul of the dead was believed to quit his body and depart to his destined abode on the 10th day after death. 728 The scourging of the men by the women was probably supposed in some way to speed the parting guest on his long journey. The dead taken out of the house by a special opening made in a wall. Examples of the custom among Aryan peoples. When a certain king of Fiji died, the side of the house was broken down to allow the body to be carried out, though there were doorways wide enough for the purpose close at hand. The missionary who records the fact could not learn the reason of it. 729 The custom of taking the dead out of the house by a special opening, which is afterwards closed up, has not been confined to Fiji. On the contrary, it has been practiced by a multitude of peoples, savage, barbarous, and civilized, in many parts of the world. For example, it was an Old Norse rule that a corpse might not be carried out of the house by the door which was used by the living, hence a hole was made in the wall at the back of the dead man's head and he was taken out through it backwards, or a hole was dug in the ground under the south wall and the body was drawn out through it. 730 The custom may have been at one time common to all the Aryan or Indo-European peoples, for it is mentioned in other of their ancient records and has been observed by widely separated branches of that great family down to modern times. Thus, the Zendavesta prescribes that, when a death has occurred, a breach shall be made in the wall and the corpse carried out through it by two men, who have first stripped off their clothes. 731 In Russia, the corpse was often carried out of the house through a window, or through a hole made for the purpose, and the custom is still kept up in many parts. 732 Speaking of the Hindus, a French traveler of the 18th century says that, instead of carrying the corpse out by the door, they make an opening in the wall by which they pass it out in a seated posture, and the hole is closed up after the ceremony. 733 Among various Hindu castes, it is still customary, when a death has occurred on an inauspicious day, to remove the corpse from the house not through the door, but through a temporary hole made in the wall. 734 Old German law required that the corpses of criminals and suicides should be carried out through a hole under the threshold. 735 In the Highlands of Scotland, the bodies of suicides were not taken out of the house for burial by the doors, but through an opening made between the wall and the thatch. 736 Examples of the custom among non-Aryan peoples. But widespread as such customs have been among Indo-European peoples, they have been by no means confined to that branch of the human race. It was an ancient Chinese practice to knock down part of the wall of a house for the purpose of carrying out a corpse. 737 Some of the Canadian Indians would never take a corpse out of the hut by the ordinary door, but always lifted a piece of the bark wall near which the dead man lay and then drew him through the opening. 738 Among the Eskimo of Bering Strait, a corpse is usually raised through the smokehole in the roof, but is never taken out by the doorway. Should the smokehole be too small, an opening is made in the rear of the house and then closed again. 739 When a Greenlander dies, they do not carry out the corpse through the entry of the house, but lift it through the window, or if he dies in a tent, they unfasten one of the skins behind, and convey it out that way. A woman behind waves a lighted chip backward and forward, and says, "There is nothing more to be had here." 740 Similarly, the Hottentots, Bechuanas, Basutos, Marats, Barongo, and many other tribes of South and West Africa never carry a corpse out by the door of the hut but always by a special opening made in the wall. That this was the train of reasoning actually followed by some peoples may be gathered from the explanations which they themselves give of the custom. Thus, among the Tusky of Alaska, those who die a natural death are carried out through a hole cut in the back of the hut or yarang. This is immediately closed up, that the spirit of the dead man may not find his way back. 747 Among the Eskimo of Hudson Bay, the nearest relatives on approach of death remove the invalid to the outside of the house, for if he should die within, he must not be carried out of the door but through a hole cut in the side wall, and it must then be carefully closed to prevent the spirit of the person from returning. 748 Again, when a Siamese is dead, his relations deposit the body in a coffin, well covered. They do not pass it through the door but let it down into the street by an opening which they make in the wall. They also carry it thrice round the house, running at the top of their speed. They believed that if they did not take this precaution, the dead man would remember the way by which he had passed, and that he would return by night to do some ill turn to his family. 749 In Travancore, the body of a dead Raja is taken out of the palace through a breach in the wall, made for the purpose, to avoid pollution of the gate, and afterwards built up again so that the departed spirit may not return through the gate to trouble the survivors. 753 On the same principle, as soon as the Indians of Tumupeza, in northwest Bolivia, have carried a corpse out of the house, they shift the door to the opposite side, in order that the deceased may not be able to find it. 754 Once more, in Mecklenburg it is a law regulating the return of the dead that they are compelled to return by the same way by which the corpse was removed from the house. In the villages of Pitcher, Bresgard, and others, the people used to have movable thresholds at the house doors, which, being fitted into the doorposts, could be shoved up. The corpse was then carried out of the house under the threshold, and therefore could not return over it. 755 Some people only remove in this manner the bodies of persons whose ghosts are especially feared. Even without such express testimonies to the meaning of the custom, we may infer from a variety of evidence that the real motive for practicing it is a fear of the ghost and a wish to prevent his return. For it is to be observed that some peoples do not carry out all their dead by a special opening, but that they accord this peculiar mode of removal only to persons who die under unlucky or disgraceful circumstances, and whose ghosts accordingly are more than usually dreaded. Thus we have seen that some modern Hindu castes observe the custom only in the case of people who have died on inauspicious days, and that in Germany and the Highlands of Scotland this mode of removal was specially reserved for the bodies of suicides, whose ghosts are exceedingly feared by many people, as appears from the stringent precautions taken against them. 756 Again, among the Kavirondo of Central Africa, when a woman dies without having borne a child, she is carried out of the back of the house. A hole is made in the wall and the corpse is ignominiously pushed through the hole and carried some distance to be buried, as it is considered a curse to die without a child. If the woman has given birth to a child, then her corpse is carried out through the front door and buried in the veranda of the house. 757 In Brittany, a stillborn child is removed from the house, not by the door, but by the window, for if by ill luck it should chance otherwise, the mothers who should pass through that fatal door would bear nothing but stillborn infants. 758 In Perchy, another province of France, the same rule is observed with regard to stillborn children, though the reason for it is not alleged. 759 But of all ghosts none perhaps inspire such deep and universal terror as the ghosts of women who have died in childbed, and extraordinary measures are accordingly taken to disable these dangerous spirits from returning and doing a mischief to the living. 760 Amongst the precautions adopted to keep them at bay is the custom of carrying their corpses out of the house by a special opening, which is afterwards blocked up. Thus in Laos, a province of Siam, the bodies of women dying in childbirth, or within a month afterwards, are not even taken out of the house in the ordinary way by the door, but are let down through the floor. 761 The Kachins of Burma stand in such fear of the ghosts of women dying in childbed that no sooner has such a death occurred than the husband, the children, and almost all the people in the house take to flight lest the woman's ghost should bite them. The body of the deceased must be burned as soon as possible in order to punish her for dying such a death, and also in order to frighten her ghost, Mimla. They bandage her eyes with her own hair and with leaves to prevent her from seeing anything. They wrap her in a mat, and they carry her out of the house, not by the ordinary door, but by an opening made for the purpose in the wall or the floor of the room where she breathed her last. Then they convey her to a deep ravine, where no one dares to pass. They lay her in the midst of a great pyre with all the clothes, jewelry, and other objects which belonged to her and of which she made use, and they burn the whole to cinders, to which they refuse the rites of sepulture. Thus they destroy all the property of the unfortunate woman, in order that her soul may not think of coming to fetch it afterwards and to bite people in the attempt. 762 Similarly, among the Kayans or Bahos of central Borneo, the corpses of women dying in childbed excite a special horror. No man and no young woman may touch them. They are not carried out of the house through the front gallery, but are thrown out of the back wall of the dwelling, some boards having been removed for the purpose. 763 Indeed, so great is the alarm felt by the Kayans at a miscarriage of this sort that when a woman labors hard in childbed, the news quickly spreads through the large communal house in which the people dwell, and if the attendants begin to fear a fatal issue, the whole household is thrown into consternation. All the men, from the chief down to the boys, will flee from the house, or, if it is night, they will clamber up among the beams of the roof and there hide in terror, and, if the worst happens, they remain there until the woman's corpse has been removed from the house for burial. 764 Sometimes the custom is observed when the original motive for it is forgotten. Sometimes, while the custom continues to be practiced, the idea which gave rise to it has either become obscured or has been incorrectly reported. Thus we are told that when a death has taken place among the Indians of Northwest America, the body is at once taken out of the house through an opening in the wall from which the boards have been removed. It is believed that his ghost would kill everyone if the body were to stay in the house. 765 Such a belief, while it would furnish an excellent reason for hurrying the corpse out of the house as soon as possible, does not explain why it should be carried out through a special opening instead of through the door. Again, when a queen of Bali died, the body was drawn out of a large aperture made in the wall to the right-hand side of the door, in the absurd opinion of cheating the devil, whom these islanders believe to lie in wait in the ordinary passage. 766 Again, in Mukden, the capital of Manchuria, the corpses of children must not be carried out of a door or window, but through a new or disused opening, in order that the evil spirit which causes the disease may not enter. The belief is that the heavenly dog which eats the sun at an eclipse demands the bodies of children, and that if they are denied to him he will bring certain calamity on the household. 767 These explanations of the custom are probably misinterpretations adopted at a later time when its original meaning was forgotten. For a custom often outlives the memory of the motives which gave it birth. And as royalty is very conservative of ancient usages, it would be no matter for surprise if the corpses of kings should continue to be carried out through special openings long after the bodies of commoners were allowed to be conveyed in commonplace fashion through the ordinary door. In point of fact, we find the old custom observed by kings in countries where it has apparently ceased to be observed by their subjects. Thus among the Sakalava and Antamarina of Madagascar, when a sovereign or a prince of the royal family dies within the enclosure of the king's palace, the corpse must be carried out of the palace, not by the door, but by a breach made for the purpose in the wall. The new sovereign could not pass through the door that had been polluted by the passage of a dead body. 768 Similarly, among the Macassars and Buginese of southern Celebes, there is in the king's palace a window reaching to the floor, through which on his decease the king's body is carried out. 769 That such a custom is only a limitation to kings of a rule which once applied to everybody becomes all the more probable, when we learn that in the island of Saliger, which lies to the south of Celebes, each house has, besides its ordinary windows, a large window in the form of a door, through which, and not through the ordinary entrance, every corpse is regularly removed at death. 770 Another Fijian funeral custom. To return from this digression to Fiji, we may conclude with a fair degree of probability that when the side of a Fijian king's house was broken down to allow his corpse to be carried out, though there were doors at hand wide enough for the purpose, the original intention was to prevent the return of his ghost, who might have proved a very unwelcome intruder to his successor on the throne. But I cannot offer any explanation of another Fijian funeral custom. You may remember that in Fiji it was customary after the death of a chief to circumcise such lads as had reached a suitable age. 771 Well, on the 5th day after a chief's death a hole used to be dug under the floor of a temple and one of the newly circumcised lads was secreted in it. Then his companions fastened the doors of the temple securely and ran away. When the lad hidden in the hole blew on a shell trumpet, the friends of the deceased chief surrounded the temple and thrust their spears at him through the fence. 772 What the exact significance of this curious rite may have been, I cannot even conjecture, but we may assume that it had something to do with the state of the late chief's soul, which was probably supposed to be lingering in the neighborhood. Fijian notions concerning the other world and the way thither. The River of the Souls. It remains to say a little as to the notions which the Fijians entertained of the other world and the way thither. After death the souls of the departed were believed to set out for Bulu or Bulotu, there to dwell with the great serpent-shaped god Nengi. His abode seems to have been generally placed in the Nakavandra Mountains, towards the western end of Viti Levu, the largest of the Fijian islands. But on this subject the ideas of the people were, as might be expected, both vague and inconsistent. Each tribe filled in the details of the mythical land and the mythical journey to suit its own geographical position. The souls had generally to cross water, either the sea or a river, and they were put across it by a ghostly ferryman, who treated the passengers with scant courtesy. 773 According to some people, the River of the Souls, Wainiyalo, is what mortals now call the Ndravo River. When the ghosts arrived on the bank, they hailed the ferryman and he paddled his canoe over to receive them. But before he would take them on board they had to state whether they proposed to ship as steerage or as cabin passengers, and he gave them their berths accordingly, for there was no mixing up of the classes in the ferry boat. The ghosts of chiefs kept strictly to themselves at one end of the canoe, and the ghosts of commoners huddled together at the other end. 774 The natives of Kandavu, in southern Fiji, say that on clear days they often see Bulotu, the spirit land, lying away across the sea with the sun shining sweetly on it, but they have long ago given up all hope of making their way to that happy land. 775 They seem to say with the demon lover, "Oh, yonder are the hills of heaven where you will never win." The place of embarkation for the ghosts. Though every island and almost every town had its own portal through which the spirits passed on their long journey to the far country, yet there was one called Nithambothambo, which appears to have been more popular and frequented than any of the others as a place of embarkation for ghosts. It is at the northern point of Mbua Bay, and the ghosts shew their good taste in choosing it as their port to sail from, for really it is a beautiful spot. The foreland juts out between two bays. A shelving beach slopes up to precipitous cliffs, their rocky face mantled with a thick green veil of creepers. Further inland the shade of tall forest trees and the softened gloom cast by crags and rocks lend to the scene an air of solemnity and hallowed repose well fitted to impress the susceptible native mind with an awful sense of the invisible beings that haunt these sacred groves. Natives have been known to come on pilgrimage to the spot expecting to meet ghosts and gods face to face. 776 The Ghost and the Pandanus Tree. Many are the perils and dangers that beset the path of the souls, Sala and Ayalo. Of these one of the most celebrated is a certain pandanus tree, at which every ghost must throw the ghost of the real whale's tooth which was placed for the purpose in his hand at burial. If he hits the tree, it is well for him, for it shews that his friends at home are strangling his wives, and accordingly he sits down contentedly to wait for the ghosts of his helpmeets, who will soon come hurrying to him. But if he makes a bad shot and misses the tree, the poor ghost is very disconsolate, for he knows that his wives are not being strangled, and who then will cook for him in the spirit land? It is a bitter thought, and he reflects with sorrow and anger on the ingratitude of men and especially of women. His reflections, as reported by the best authority, run thus: how is this? For a long time I planted food for my wife, and it was also of great use to her friends. Why then is she not allowed to follow me? Do my friends love me no better than this, after so many years of toil? Will no one, in love to me, strangle my wife? 777 Hard fate of unmarried ghosts. But if the lot of a married ghost, whose wives have not been murdered, is hard, it is nevertheless felicity itself compared to the fate of bachelor ghosts. In the first place there is a terrible being called the Great Woman, who lurks in a shady defile, ready to pounce out on him, and if he escapes her clutches it is only to fall in with a much worse monster, of the name of Nanga, from whom there is, humanly speaking, no escape. This ferocious goblin lays himself out to catch the souls of bachelors, and so vigilant and alert is he that not a single unmarried Fijian ghost is known to have ever reached the mansions of the blessed. He sits beside a big black stone at high water mark waiting for his prey. The bachelor ghosts are aware that it would be useless to attempt to march past him when the tide is in, so they wait till it is low water and then try to sneak past him on the wet sand left by the retiring billows. Vain hope. Nanga, sitting by the stone, only smiles grimly and asks, with withering sarcasm, whether they imagine that the tide will never flow again? It does so only too soon for the poor ghosts, driving them with every breaking wave nearer and nearer to their implacable enemy, till the water laps on the fatal stone, and then he grips the shivering souls and dashes them to pieces on the big black block. 778 The Killer of Souls. Again, there is a very terrible giant armed with a great axe, who lies in wait for all and sundry. He makes no nice distinction between the married and the unmarried, but strikes out at all ghosts indiscriminately. Those whom he wounds dare not present themselves in their damaged state to the great god Ndengi, so they never reach the happy fields, but are doomed to roam the rugged mountains disconsolate. However, many ghosts contrive to slip past him unscathed. It is said that after the introduction of firearms into the islands, the ghost of a certain chief made very good use of a musket which had been providentially buried with his body. When the giant drew near and was about to lunge out with the axe in his usual style, the ghost discharged the blunderbuss in his face, and while the giant was fully engaged in dodging the hail of bullets, the chief rushed past him and now enjoys celestial happiness. 779 Some lay the scene of this encounter a little beyond the town of Nambanagatai, for it is to be remembered that many of the places in the Path of the Souls were identified with real places in the Fijian Islands. And the name of the giant is Samuyalo, that is, the Killer of Souls. He artfully conceals himself in some mangrove bushes just beyond the town, from which he rushes out in the nick of time to fell the passing ghosts. Whenever he kills a ghost, he cooks and eats him, and that is the end of the poor ghost. It is the second death. The highway to the Elysian Fields runs, or used to run, right through the town of Nambanagatai, so all the doorways of the houses were placed opposite each other to allow free and uninterrupted passage to the invisible travelers. And the inhabitants spoke to each other in low tones and communicated at a little distance by signs. The screech of a paraquet in the woods was the signal of the approach of a ghost or ghosts. The number of screeches was proportioned to the number of the ghosts, one screech, one ghost, and so on. 780 A Trap for Unwary Ghosts. Souls who escape the Killer of Souls pass on till they come to Nainland, one of the highest peaks of the Covandra Mountains. Here the path ends abruptly on the brink of a precipice, the foot of which is washed by a deep lake. Over the edge of the precipice projects a large steer-oar, and the handle is held either by the great god Ndengi himself or, according to the better opinion, by his deputy. When a ghost comes up and peers ruefully over the precipice, the deputy accosts him. "Under what circumstances," he asks, "do you come to us? How did you conduct yourself in the other world?" Should the ghost be a man of rank, he may say, "I am a great chief. I lived as a chief, and my conduct was that of a chief. I had great wealth, many wives, and ruled over a powerful people. I have destroyed many towns, and slain many in war." "Good, good," says the deputy, "just sit down on the blade of that oar, and refresh yourself in the cool breeze." If the ghost is unwary enough to accept the invitation, he has no sooner seated himself on the blade of the oar with his legs dangling over the abyss, than the deputy deity tilts up the other end of the oar and precipitates him into the deep water, far, far below. A loud smack is heard as the ghost collides with the water. There is a splash, a gurgle, a ripple, and all is over. The ghost has gone to his account in Murimuria, a very second-rate sort of heaven, if it is nothing worse. But a ghost who is in favor with the great god Ndengi is warned by him not to sit down on the blade of the oar but on the handle. The ghost takes the hint and seats himself firmly on the safe end of the oar, and when the deputy deity tries to heave it up, he cannot, for he has no purchase. So the ghost remains master of the situation, and after an interval for refreshment is sent back to earth to be deified. 781 Murimuria, an inferior sort of heaven. The Fijian Elysium. In Murimuria, which, as I said, is an inferior sort of heaven, the departed souls by no means lead a life of pure and unmixed enjoyment. Some of them are punished for the sins they committed in the flesh. But the Fijian notion of sin differs widely from ours. Thus we saw that the ghosts of men who did no murder in their lives were punished for their negligence by having to pound muck with clubs. Again, people who had not their ears bored on earth are forced in Hades to go about forever bearing on their shoulders one of the logs of wood on which barkcloth is beaten out with mallets, and all who see the sinner bending under the load jeer at him. Again, women who were not tattooed in their life are chased by the female ghosts, who scratch and cut and tear them with sharp shells, giving them no respite, or they scrape the flesh from their bones and bake it into bread for the gods. And ghosts who have done anything to displease the gods are laid flat on their faces in rows and converted into taro beds. But the few who do find their way into the Fijian Elysium are blessed indeed. There the sky is always cloudless, the groves are perfumed with delicious scents, the open glades in the forest are pleasant, there is abundance of all that heart can desire. Language fails to describe the ineffable bliss of the happy land. There the souls of the truly good, who have murdered many of their fellows on earth and fed on their roasted bodies, are lapped in joy forever. 782 Fijian Doctrine of Transmigration. Nevertheless, the souls of the dead were not universally believed to depart by the spirit path to the other world or to stay there forever. To a certain extent, the doctrines of transmigration found favor with the Fijians. Some of them held that the spirits of the dead wandered about the villages in various shapes and could make themselves visible or invisible at pleasure. The places which these vagrant souls loved to haunt were known to the people, who in passing by them were wont to make propitiatory offerings of food or cloth. For that reason, too, they were very loath to go abroad on a dark night lest they should come bolt upon a ghost. Further, it was generally believed that the soul of a celebrated chief might after death enter into some young man of the tribe and animate him to deeds of valor. Persons so distinguished were pointed out and regarded as highly favored, great respect was paid to them, they enjoyed many personal privileges, and their opinions were treated with much consideration. 783 Few souls saved under the old Fijian dispensation. On the whole, when we survey the many perils which beset the way to the Fijian heaven, and the many risks which the souls of the dead ran of dying the second death in the other world or of being knocked on the head by the living in this, we shall probably agree with the missionary Mr. Williams in concluding that under the old Fijian dispensation there were few indeed that were saved. Few, comparatively, he says, are left to inhabit the regions of Mbulu, and the immortality even of these is sometimes disputed. The belief in a future state is universal in Fiji, but their superstitious notions often border upon transmigration, and sometimes teach an eventual annihilation. 784 Concluding Observations. Here I must break off my survey of the natural belief in immortality among mankind. At the outset I had expected to carry the survey further, but I have already exceeded the usual limits of these lectures and I must not trespass further on your patience. Yet the inquiry which I have opened seems worthy to be pursued, and if circumstances should admit of it, I shall hope at some future time to resume the broken thread of these researches and to follow it a little further through the labyrinth of human history. Be that as it may, I will now conclude with a few general observations suggested by the facts which I have laid before you. Strength and universality of the natural belief in immortality among savages. Wars between savage tribes spring in large measure from their belief in immortality. Economic loss involved in sacrifices to the dead. In the first place, then, it is impossible not to be struck by the strength, and perhaps we may say the universality, of the natural belief in immortality among the savage races of mankind. With them a life after death is not a matter of speculation and conjecture, of hope and fear, it is a practical certainty which the individual as little dreams of doubting as he doubts the reality of his conscious existence. He assumes it without inquiry and acts upon it without hesitation, as if it were one of the best ascertained truths within the limits of human experience. The belief influences his attitude towards the higher powers, the conduct of his daily life, and his behavior towards his fellows. More than that, it regulates to a great extent the relations of independent communities to each other. For the state of war, which normally exists between many, if not most, neighboring savage tribes, springs in large measure directly from their belief in immortality, since one of the commonest motives for hostility is a desire to appease the angry ghosts of friends, who are supposed to have perished by the baleful arts of sorcerers in another tribe, and who, if vengeance is not inflicted on their real or imaginary murderers, will wreak their fury on their undutiful fellow tribesmen. Thus the belief in immortality has not merely colored the outlook of the individual upon the world, it has deeply affected the social and political relations of humanity in all ages, for the religious wars and persecutions, which distracted and devastated Europe for ages, were only the civilized equivalents of the battles and murders which the fear of ghosts has instigated amongst almost all races of savages of whom we possess a record. Regarded from this point of view, the faith in a life hereafter has been sown like dragon's teeth on the earth and has brought forth crop after crop of armed men, who have turned their swords against each other. And when we consider further the gratuitous and wasteful destruction of property as well as of life which is involved in sacrifices to the dead, we must admit that with all its advantages the belief in immortality has entailed heavy economical losses upon the races, and they are practically all the races of the world who have indulged in this expensive luxury. It is not for me to estimate the extent and gravity of the consequences, moral, social, political, and economic, which flow directly from the belief in immortality. I can only point to some of them and commend them to the serious attention of historians and economists, as well as of moralists and theologians. How does the savage belief in immortality bear on the question of the truth or falsehood of that belief in general? The answer depends to some extent on the view we take of human nature. The view of the grandeur and dignity of man. My second observation concerns not the practical consequences of the belief in immortality, but the question of its truth or falsehood. That, I need hardly say, is an even more difficult problem than the other, and as I intimated at the outset of the lectures, I find myself wholly incompetent to solve it. Accordingly, I have confined myself to the comparatively easy task of describing some of the forms of the belief and some of the customs to which it has given rise, without presuming to pass judgment upon them. I must leave it to others to place my collections of facts in the scales and to say whether they incline the balance for or against the truth of this momentous belief, which has been so potent for good or ill in history. In every inquiry much depends upon the point of view from which the inquirer approaches his subject. He will see it in different proportions and in different lights according to the angle and the distance from which he regards it. The subject under discussion in the present case is human nature itself, and as we all know, men have formed very different estimates of themselves and their species. On the one hand, there are those who love to dwell on the grandeur and dignity of man, and who swell with pride at the contemplation of the triumphs which his genius has achieved in the visionary world of imagination as well as in the realm of nature. Surely, they say, such a glorious creature was not born for mortality, to be snuffed out like a candle, to fade like a flower, to pass away like a breath. Is all that penetrating intellect, that creative fancy, that vaulting ambition, those noble passions, those far-reaching hopes, to come to nothing, to shrivel up into a pinch of dust? It is not so, it cannot be. Man is the flower of this wide world, the Lord of creation, the crown and consummation of all things, and it is to wrong him and his Creator to imagine that the grave is the end of all. To those who take this lofty view of human nature, it is easy and obvious to find in the similar beliefs of savages a welcome confirmation of their own cherished faith, and to insist that a conviction so widely spread and so firmly held must be based on some principle, call it instinct or intuition or what you will, which is deeper than logic and cannot be confuted by reasoning. The view of the pettiness and insignificance of man. On the other hand, there are those who take a different view of human nature, and who find in its contemplation a source of humility rather than of pride. They remind us how weak, how ignorant, how short-lived is the individual, how infirm of purpose, how purblind of vision, how subject to pain and suffering, to diseases that torture the body and wreck the mind. They say that if the few short years of his life are not wasted in idleness and vice, they are spent for the most part in a perpetually recurring round of trivialities, in the satisfaction of merely animal wants, in eating, drinking, and slumber. When they survey the history of mankind as a whole, they find the record checkered and stained by folly and crime, by broken faith, insensate ambition, wanton aggression, injustice, cruelty, and lust, and seldom illumined by the mild radiance of wisdom and virtue. And when they turn their eyes from man himself to the place he occupies in the universe, how are they overwhelmed by a sense of his littleness and insignificance? They see the earth which he inhabits dwindle to a speck in the unimaginable infinities of space, and the brief span of his existence shrink into a moment in the inconceivable infinities of time. And they ask, shall a creature so puny and frail claim to live forever, to outlast not only the present starry system but every other that, when earth and sun and stars have crumbled into dust, shall be built upon their ruins in the long, long hereafter? It is not so, it cannot be. The claim is nothing but the outcome of exaggerated self-esteem, of inflated vanity. It is the claim of a moth, shriveled in the flame of a candle, to outlive the sun, the claim of a worm to survive the destruction of this terrestrial globe in which it burrows. Those who take this view of the pettiness and transitoriness of man compared with the vastness and permanence of the universe find little in the beliefs of savages to alter their opinion. They see in savage conceptions of the soul and its destiny nothing but a product of childish ignorance, the hallucinations of hysteria, the ravings of insanity, or the concoctions of deliberate fraud and imposture. They dismiss the whole of them as a pack of superstitions and lies, unworthy the serious attention of a rational mind, and they say that if such dribblings do not refute the belief in immortality, as indeed from the nature of things they cannot do, they are at least fitted to invest its high-flown pretensions with an air of ludicrous absurdity. The conclusion left open. Such are the two opposite views which I conceive may be taken of the savage testimony to the survival of our conscious personality after death. I do not presume to adopt the one or the other. It is enough for me to have laid a few of the facts before you. I leave you to draw your own conclusion. Footnote 701, Return, Berthold Seaman, Viti, An Account of a Government Mission to the Vishan or Fijian Islands, Cambridge, 1862, pp. 391 square. Footnote 702, Return, T.H. Williams, Fiji and the Fijians, I-216. Footnote 703, Return, T.H. Williams, Opsit I-216, 218 square, Basil Thompson, The Fijians, page 112. Footnote 704, Return, Hazelwood, quoted by Captain J. E. Erskine, Journal of a Cruise Among the Islands of the Western Pacific, London, 1853, pages 246 square. Footnote 705, Return, C.H. Wilkes, Narrative of the United States Exploring Expedition, New Edition, New York, 1851, 3. 83 square, T.H. Williams, Fiji and the Fijians, I-217 SQQ. Footnote 706, Return, C.H. Wilkes, Narrative of the United States Exploring Expedition, New Edition, New York, 1851, 3. 49, 86, 351, 352, T.H. Williams, Fiji and the Fijians, I-221 to 223, B. Seaman, Viti, pages 392 to 394. Footnote 707, Return, T.H. Williams, Opsit I-191 square. Footnote 708, Return, T.H. Williams, Fiji and the Fijians, I-223, 231. Footnote 709, Return, C.H. Wilkes, Opsit 3. 87, T.H. Williams, Opsit I-226, 227, Basil Thompson, The Fijians, pages 157 SQQ. Footnote 710, Return, C.H. Wilkes, Opsit 3. 87 square, T.H. Williams, Opsit I-224 square, Captain J. E. Erskine, Opsit page 250, Lorimer Fison, Tales from Old Fiji, London, 1904, pages 166 square. As for the treatment of castaways, C.J. E. Erskine, Opsit page 249, T.H. Williams, Opsit I-210. The latter writer mentions a recent case in which 14 or 16 shipwrecked persons were cooked and eaten. Footnote 711, Return, the Reverend Lorimer Fison, in a letter to me dated August 26, 1898. I have already quoted the passage in The Magic Art and the Evolution of Kings, I-378. Footnote 712, Return, T.H. Williams, Fiji and the Fijians, I-225 square. Footnote 713, Return, T.H. Williams, Opsit I-231. Footnote 714, Return, C.H. Wilkes, Opsit 3. 97, T.H. Williams, Opsit I-53. Footnote 715, Return, John Jackson's Narrative, in Captain J. E. Erskine's Journal of a Cruise Among the Islands of the Western Pacific, London, 1853, pages 464 square, 472 square. The genital members of the men over whom the canoe was dragged were cut off and hung on a sacred tree, Akotambu, which was already artificially prolific in fruit, both of the masculine and feminine gender. The tree which bore such remarkable fruit was commonly an ironweed tree standing in a conspicuous situation. As to these sacrifices, compare C.H. Wilkes, Opsit 3. 97, Lorimer Fison, Tales from Old Fiji, pages 16. Square. Footnote 716, Return, T.H. Williams, Op. Cit I, 112. Footnote 717, Return, T.H. Williams, Opsit I-55. Footnote 718, Return, Lorimer Fison, Tales from Old Fiji, pages XX. 21. Square, T.H. Williams, Opsit I-247, B. Seaman, Viti, Cambridge, 1862, page 401. Footnote 719, Return, T.H. Williams, Opsit I-55 square. The writer witnessed what he calls the ceremony of consecration in the case of a young man of the highest rank in Somosomo, and he has described what he saw. In this case, a special hut was not built for the manslayer, and he was allowed to pass the nights in the temple of the war god. Footnote 720, Return, see above, pages 205 square, 229 square, 258, 279 square, 323, 396, 415. Footnote 721, Return, T.H. Williams, Opsit I-55. Footnote 722, return, Ch. Wilkes, opposite 3. 98, 99 square. Compare Lorimer Fison, Tales from Old Fiji, page 163. A person who has defiled himself by touching a corpse is called Yambo, and is not allowed to touch food with his hands for several days. The custom as to a surviving widow is mentioned by T.H. Williams, opposite I 198. Footnote 723, return, Lorimer Fison, Tales from Old Fiji, page 167. Footnote 724, return, Ch. Wilkes, opposite 3. 101, T.H. Williams, opposite I 197 square. Lorimer Fison, Tales from Old Fiji, p. 168, Basil Thomson, The Fijian, page 375. Footnote 725, return, T.H. Williams, opposite I 197, 198. Footnote 726, return, Ch. Wilkes, opposite 3. 99, footnote 727, return, T.H. Williams, opposite I 198 square. Footnote 728, return, Ch. Wilkes, L.C. of footnote 729, return, T.H. Williams, Fiji and the Fijians, I 197. Footnote 730, return, K. Weinhold, Altnordisches Leben, Berlin, 1856, page 476. Footnote 731, return, The Zendavesta, Part 1. The Vendidad, translated by James Darmesteter, Oxford, 1880, page 95, Fargard, 8. 2, 10, Sacred Books of the East, Volume 4. Footnote 732, return, W. Artes Ralston, The Songs of the Russian People, 2nd edition, London, 1872, page 318. Footnote 733, return, Sonorat, Voyage aux Orientales la Chine, Paris, 1782, I. 86. Footnote 734, return, J. A. Du Bois, Moors, Institutions et Ceremonies de Peuples de l'Inde, Paris, 1825, 2. 225, E. Thurston, Ethnographic Notes in Southern India, Madras, 1906, pages 226 square. Footnote 735, return, J. Grimm, Deutscher Exulterthumer 3rd edition, Göttingen, 1881, pages 726 SQQ. Footnote 736, return, Reverend J. G. Campbell, Superstitions of the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, Glasgow, 1900, page 242. Footnote 737, return, The Sacred Books of China, translated by James Legge, Part 3. The Leakey, I. X., Oxford, 1885, pages 144 square, Book 2. Sect. I. PT.4. 33, Sacred Books of the East, Volume 27, J. F. Lafado, Moors de Sauvages Américains, Paris, 1724, 2. 401 square, citing LeConte, Nouveau. Memoirs de la Chine, Volume 2. Page 187. Footnote 738, return, Relations de Jesuits, 1633, page 11, ID. 1634, page 23, Canadian reprint, Quebec, 1858, J. G. Cole, Kichigami, Bremen, 1859, page 149. Note. Footnote 739, return, E. W. Nelson, The Eskimo About Bering Strait, 18th Annual Report of the Bureau of American Ethnology, Part 1, Washington, 1899, page 311. Footnote 740, return, David Krantz, History of Greenland, London, 1767, I. 237. Compare Hans Egede, Description of Greenland, 2nd edition, London, 1818, pages 152 square. Captain G. F. Lyon, Private Journal, London, 1824, page 370. C. F. Hall, Narrative of the Second Arctic Expedition, Washington, 1879, page 265, Eskimo. Footnote 741, return, P. Colburn, The Present State of the Cape of Good Hope, London, 1731 to 1738, I. 316. C. P. Thunberg, An Account of the Cape of Good Hope, in Pinkerton's Voyages and Travels, 16. London, 1814, page 142, Bulletin de la Société de Géographie, Paris, 2, Surrey, 2. 1834, page 196, Bechuanas, ID. 7. Surrey, 7. 1886, page 587, Fernando Pavitiar Bucetitf Damas, Relation d'un voyage d'exploration au nord-est de la colonie du Cap de Bonne-Espérance, Paris, 1842, pages 502 square. C. J. Anderson, Lake Ngami, 2nd edition, London, 1856, page 466, G. Fritsch, Die Eingeberien in Südafrikas, Breslau, 1872, pages 210, 335, R. Moffat, Missionary Labors and Scenes in Southern Africa, London, 1842, page 307, E. Casales, The Basutos, London, 1861, page 202, Ladislas Magyar, Reisen in South Africa, Budapest and Leipzig, 1859, page 350, Reverend J. MacDonald, Light in Africa, 2nd edition, London, 1890, page 166, E. Begin, Les Marats, Lausanne and Fontaines, 1903, page 115, Henri Ajunid, Les Baronga, Neuchâtel, 1898, page 48, ID. The Life of a South African Tribe, Neuchâtel, 1912, page 138, Dudley Kidd, The Essential Kaffir, London, 1904, page 247, A.F. Amakler Ferryman, British Nigeria, London, 1902, page 234, Ramsier and Coon, 4 Years in Ashanti, London, 1875, page 50, A.B. Ellis, The Land of Fetish, London, 1883, page 13, ID. The Tree-Speaking Peoples of the Gold Coast, London, 1887, p. 239, E. Paragod, Chez les Acanti, Neuchâtel, 1906, page 127, J. Spieth, Die Ustam, Berlin, 1906, page 756, H. R. Plummer, Notes on the Kororafua and Yukon, Journal of the African Society, No. 44, July, 1912, page 414. The custom is also observed by some tribes of Central Africa. See Miss A. Werner, The Natives of British Central Africa, London, 1906, page 161. B. Gutman, Trouwer und Begrabnissitten der Wudschaga, Globus, 89. 1906, page 200, Reverend N. Stam, Religious Conceptions of the Kabarando, Anthropos, v. 1910, page 361. Footnote 742, return, see Snauk Het Gagelen in Zijni Bewoners, Batavia, 1903, page 313. Footnote 743, return, Oral Kraus, Die Tlinketindiener, Jena, 1885, page 225, Franz Boas, in 6th Report of the Committee on the Northwestern Tribes of Canada, page 23, separate reprint from the report of the British Association for the Advancement of Science, Leeds Meeting, 1890, J. R. Swanton, Contributions to the Ethnology of the Haida, Leiden and New York, 1905, pages 52, 54, The Jesup North Pacific Expedition, Memoir of the American Museum of Natural History. Footnote 744, return, J. A. H. Lewis, The Gates of Thibet, Calcutta, 1894, page 114. Footnote 745, return, H. Von Lislaki, Volksglaub und Religioser Brochter Zeuner, Munsterreich W., 1891, page 99. Footnote 746, return, W. Ejachelson, The Koryak, New York and Leiden, 1908. Pages 110 square, The Jesup North Pacific Expedition, Memoir of the American Museum of Natural History. Footnote 747, return, W. H. Dall, Alaska and Its Resources, London, 1870, page 382. Footnote 748, return, Lucian M. Turner, Ethnology of the Ungava District, Hudson Bay Territory, 11th Annual Report of the Bureau of Ethnology, Washington, 1894, page 191. Footnote 749, return, Manager Brudier, in Annales de l'Association de la Propagation de la Foi v. Lyons in Paris, 1831, page 180. Compare Manager Palagoix, Description du Royaume Taoyusayem, Paris, 1854, I. 245, Adolphe Bastien, Die Volker des Auslichenasian, 3. Jena, 1867, page 258, E. Young, The Kingdom of the Yellow Robe, Westminster, 1898, page 246. Footnote 750, return, S. Mateer, Native Life in Travancore, London, 1883, page 137. Compare A. Butterworth, Royal Funerals in Travancore, Indian Antiquary, 31. 1902, page 251. Footnote 751, return, C. H. Hose and W. McDougall, The Pagan Tribes of Borneo, London, 1912, 2. 35, footnote 752, return, S.K. Kuznetsov, Über den Glauben von Jenseits und den Toten Kultestert Skiramissen, Internationales Archiv für Ethnography, 9. 1896, page 157. Footnote 753, return, P.S. Palace, Ries der Verschiedenen Provinzen des Russischen Reichs, St. Petersburg, 1771-1776, 3. 75, Middendorf, Riesen den Ossersten Norden und Osten Sibiriens, 4. 1464, footnote 754, return, Exploraciones y Noticias Hydrográficas de los Ríos del Norte de Bolivia, publicados por Manuel V. Bolivian, segunda parte, Diario del Viaje al Madre de Dios hecho por el P. Father Nicolás Armentia, en los años de 1884 y 1885, La Paz, 1890, page 20, cuando muere alguno, apenas saquen el cadáver de la casa, cambian la puerta al lado opuesto, para que no dé con ella el difunto. Footnote 755, return, Karl Barth, Sagan, Märchen und die Gebräuche US Mecklenburg, Vienna, 1879-1880, 2. 100, section 358. Footnote 756, return, for some evidence on this subject, see Art Lasch, Die Behandlung der Leiche des Selbstmorders, Globus, 86. 1899, pages 63-66, Reverend Jake Roscoe, The Baganda, London, 1911, pages 20 square, Karasek, Beitrag zur Kenntnis der Waschamba, Basler Archiv, I, 1911, pages 190 square. Footnote 757, return, Reverend N. Stam, The Religious Conceptions of the Cavarando, Anthropos, v. 1910, page 361. Footnote 758, return, Alfred Denour, Coutumes, Myths, et Traditions de Provinces de France, Paris and Lyons, 1846, p. 198. Footnote 759, return, Félix Chapuisseau, Le Folklore de la Beaucité du Perche, Paris, 1902, 2. 164. Footnote 760, return, for some evidence on this subject see Psyche's Task, pages 64 square. Footnote 761, return, Karlbach, Temples and Elephants, London, 1884, page 262. Footnote 762, return, C.H. Gilhodes, Naissance et Enfance chez les Cachans, Bermany, Anthropos, 6. 1911, pages 872 square. Footnote 763, return, A. W. Inuanwis, Cair durch Borneo, Leiden, 1901-1907, I. 91. Footnote 764, return, C.H. Hose and W. McDougall, The Pagan Tribes of Borneo, London, 1912, 2. 155, footnote 765, return, Franz Boas, in 6th Report of the Committee on the Northwestern Tribes of Canada, page 23, separate reprint from the report of the British Association for the Advancement of Science, Leeds Meeting, 1890. Footnote 766, return, Prevost, quoted by John Crawford, History of the Indian Archipelago, Edinburgh, 1820, 2. 245, compare Adolf Bastian, Die Volker des Östlichen Asien, v. Jena, 1869, page 83. Footnote 767, return, Mrs. Bishop, Isabella L. Bird, Korea and Her Neighbors, London, 1898, I. 239 square. Footnote 768, return, Arnold van Gennep, Tabou et Totemism à Madagascar, Paris, 1904, p. 65, quoting Dr. Cadet. Footnote 769, return, B.F. Mathis, Bijdragen tot de Ethnologie van Zuid-Celebes, The Hague, 1875, page 139, id. Over de ADS of Gewunten der Makassaren en Boganesen, Versligen en Mededelingen der Koninklijke Academie van Wetenschappen, Afdeling Letterkunde, Derd Reeks, 2. Amsterdam, 1885, page 142. Footnote 770, return, W.M. Donsler en Tekeningen over Het Eiland Saliger, Mededelingen van Wech het Nederlandsk Zendelingenutschap, I. 1857, page 291. Footnote 771, return, see above, page 426. Footnote 772, return, T.H. Williams, Fiji and the Fijians, 2nd edition, London, 1860, I. 167. Footnote 773, return, C.H. Wilkes, Narrative of the United States Exploring Expedition, New Edition, New York, 1851, 3. 83, Basil Thomson, The Fijians, page 117. Footnote 774, return, Basil Thomson, opposite page 121. Footnote 775, return, Lorimer Fison, Tales from Old Fiji, page 163. Footnote 776, return, T.H. Williams, Fiji and the Fijians, I. 239. Footnote 777, return, T.H. Williams, opposite I. 243 square. Compare Berthold Seaman, Viti, An Account of a Government Mission to the Vision of Fijian Islands in the years 1860 to 1861, Cambridge, 1862, page 399, Lorimer Fison, Tales from Old Fiji, p. 163, Basil Thomson, The Fijians, pages 120 square, 121 square. Footnote 778, return, T.H. Williams, Opsit I, 244 square. Footnote 779, return, C.H. Wilkes, Opsit 3. 83, footnote 780, return, T.H. Williams, Opsit I, 245 square. Footnote 781, return, T.H. Williams, Opsit I, 246 square. Footnote 782, return, T.H. Williams, Opsit I, 247. Footnote 783, return, C.H. Wilkes, Opsit 3. 85 square. Footnote 784, return, T.H. Williams, Opsit I, 248. Note myth of the continuance of death. 785. The following story is told by the Bololo of the Upper Congo to explain the continuance, if not the origin, of death in the world. One day, while a man was working in the forest, a little man with two bundles, one large and one small, went up to him and said, "Which of these bundles will you have?" "The large one contains knives, looking-glasses, cloth, and so forth, and the small one contains immortal life." "I cannot choose by myself," answered the man, "I must go and ask the other people in the town." While he was gone to ask the others, some women arrived and the choice was left to them. They tried the edges of the knives, decked themselves in the cloth, admired themselves in the looking-glasses, and, without more ado, chose the big bundle. The little man, picking up the small bundle, vanished. So when the man came back from the town, the little man and his bundles were gone. The women exhibited and shared the things, but death continued on the earth. Hence the people often say, "Oh, if those women had only chosen the small bundle, we should not be dying like this." 786. Footnote 785, return, see above, page 77. Footnote 786, return, Reverend John H. Weeks, Stories and Other Notes from the Upper Congo, Folklore, 12. 1901, page 461, id. Among Congo Cannibals, London, 1913, page 218. The country of the Bololo lies 5 miles south of the equator, on longitude 18 degrees east. Index Abinal, Father, 49 Abipones, their belief in sorcery as a cause of death, 35 abnormal mental states explained by inspiration, 15 Aborigines, magical powers attributed by immigrants to, 193 abstinence from certain food in mourning, 198, 208, 209, 230, 314, 360, 452 abundance of food and water favorable to social progress, 90 square action as a clue to belief, 143 actors personating ghosts and spirits, 176, 179 square, 180 SQQ. 185 SQQ. Adiri, the land of the dead, 211, 212, 213, 214 Admiralty Islands, 393, 400, 401 Islanders, their myths of the origin of death, 71, 76 square advance of culture among the Aborigines of southeastern Australia, 141 square, 148 square Africa, Aborigines of, their ideas as to the cause of death, 49 SQQ. Use of poison or deal in, 50 SQQ. British Central, 162, British East, 61, 66, 254 Agriculture, rise of, favorable to astronomy, 140 square, Fijian, 408 Akamba, their story of the origin of death, 61 square Akakuyu, resurrection and circumcision among the, 254 Al Chiringa or Dreamtimes, 96, 103, 114 Ancestors, their marvelous powers, 103 Home of the Dead, 167 Alphas of Celebes, 166 Alligators, Ghosts and 380 Alals, Bachelors' Houses, 221, 222 Altars, Stones used as, 379 Amputation of fingers in mourning, 199, 426. SQ. 451 amulets consisting of relics of the dead, 332, 370 ancestor, totemic, developing into a god, 113 ancestor worship possibly evolved from totemism, 114 square ancestors, reincarnation of, 92 SQQ. Marvelous powers ascribed to remote, 103, 114 square, totemic, traditions concerning, 115 SQQ. Dramatic ceremonies to commemorate the doings of, 118 SQQ. Possible evolution of worship of, in Central Australia, 125 square, worshipped, 221, 297 square, 328 SQQ. 338, 340, ghosts of, appealed to for help, 258 square, offerings to, 298, prayers to, 329 square, 332 SQQ. See also dead ancestral gods, foreskins of circumcised lads offered to, 427, libations to, 430, 438 images, 307 SQQ. 315, 316 square, 321, 322 spirits help hunters and fishers, 226, shrines for, 316, 317, worshipped as gods, 369, worshipped in the Nanga, 428 square, firstfruits offered to, 429, cloth and weapons offered to, 430 square, novices presented to, at initiation, 432 square, 434. Angola, the poison ordeal in, 51 square Angoni, their burial customs, 162 animals, souls of sorcerers in, 39, spirits of, go to the spirit land, 210, sacrifices to the souls of, 239, transmigration of dead into, 242, 245, ghosts in the form of, 282, ghosts turn into, 287, ghosts incarnate in, 379 SQ. Animistic views of the Papuans, 264 Angia, a mythical being, 128 Anam, 67, 69 anointing manslayers, 448 anthills, ghosts turn into, 287 ant totem, dramatic ceremony concerned with, 120 square ants nests, ghosts turn into, 351 anthropology, comparative and descriptive, 230 square antemarina of Madagascar, burial custom of the, 461 Anudo, a creator, 296 apparitions, 396, fear of, 414 appearance of the dead in dreams, 229 Araucanians of Chile, their disbelief in natural death, 35, 53 square Arawaks of Guyana, 36, their myth of the origin of death, 70 Armbone, final burial ceremony performed with the 167 square, lower, of dead preserved, 274 bones, special treatment of the 199 of dead preserved, 225, 249 Aroma District of British New Guinea, 201, 202 arrowheads made of bones of the dead, 352 art, primitive religious, 114, Papuan, 220 Arugo, soul of dead, 207 Aramburinga, spiritual double, 164 Arunta, of Central Australia, 94, ceremonies connected with totems, 119 SQQ. Their magical ceremonies for the multiplication of the totems, 122 square, their customs as to the hair of the dead, 138, their cuttings for the dead, 155 square, 159, burial customs of the, 164 SQ. 166 Aryan burial custom, 453 Asa, secret society, 233 Ashanti story of the origin of death, 63 square ashes smeared on mourners, 184, 361 Astrolabe Bay in German New Guinea, 218, 230, 235, 237 Astronomy, rise of, favored by agriculture, 140 square asylums, 243 Asiren, dead man, 457 Ataro, a powerful ghost, 377 Atonement for sick chief, 427 Occam, a mythical being, 181 Aurora, one of the New Hebrides, 360, 382 Australia, causes which retarded progress in, 89 square, germs of a worship of the dead. In, 168 square. See also Central Australia, Western Australia, the Aborigines of, their ideas as to death from natural causes, 40 SQQ. Their primitive character, 88, 91, the belief in immortality among, 127 SQQ. Thought to be reborn in white people, 130, 131 SQQ. Their burial customs, 144 SQQ. Their primitive condition, 217, South, beliefs as to the dead in, 134 SQQ. Australia, Southeastern, beliefs as to the dead in, 133 square, 139, burial customs among the Aborigines of, 145 SQQ. Western, burial customs in, 147, 150, 151 authority of chiefs based on their claim to magical powers, 395 avenging a death, pretense of, 282, 328 bachelor ghosts, hard fate of, 464 bachelors' houses, 221 bad and good, different fate of the, after death, 354 Baganda, their ideas as to the causes of death, 56 N. 2. Their myth of the origin of death, 78 SQQ. See also Uganda Bahos, of Borneo, 459 Bonners of Cochinchina, 74 Bakari, of Brazil, 35 Bakeru, of the Victorian Nyanza, 50 Bali, burial custom in, 460 Balking ghosts, 455 SQQ. Bololo, of the Upper Congo, their myth of the continuance of death, 472 Balam, ghost or spirit of dead, 244, name for bull roarer, 250, name for a ghost or monster who swallows lads at initiation, 251, 255, 260, 261, soul of a dead man, 257, 261 Bamler, G, 291, 297 square bananas and myths of the origin of death, 60, 70, 72 square bandages to prevent entrance of ghosts, 396 bandaging eyes of corpse, 459 Banks Islands, 343, 353, 386, myths of the origin of death in 71, 83 square islanders. Funeral customs of the 355 SQQ. Bantu family, 60 Baranga, the 61, burial custom of the 454 Bartle Bay, 206, 208 Basutos, the 61, burial custom of the 454 Bat and myth of origin of death, 75 bathing in sea after funeral, 207 square, as purification after a death, 314, 319 Batel, Andrew, 51 square Bechuanas, the 61, burial custom of the 454 Beatles and myth of the origin of death, 70 Balep tribe of New Caledonia, 325 belief, acts as a clue to 143 belief in immortality, origin of belief in 25 SQQ. Almost universal among races of mankind, 33, among the Aborigines of Central Australia, 87 SQQ. Among the islanders of Torres Straits, 170 SQQ. Among the natives of British New Guinea, 190 SQQ. Among the natives of German New Guinea, 216 SQQ. Among the natives of Dutch New Guinea, 303 SQQ. Among the natives of Southern Melanesia, 324 SQQ. Among the natives of Central Melanesia, 343 SQQ. Its practical effect on the life of the Central Melanesians, 391 square, among the natives of Northern Melanesia, 393 SQQ. Among the Fijians, 406 SQQ. Strongly held by savages, 468, destruction of life and property entailed by the 468 square, the question of its truth, 469 SQQ. Belief in sorcery a cause of keeping down the population, 38, 40 Berkeley, his theory of knowledge, 11 square Berlin Harbor in German New Guinea, 218 Bernau, Reverend J. H., 38 Barrelstone in Rosemary, 130 Betendalo, the land of the dead, 350 Boches, of the Himalayas, 163 Biak or Wyak Island, 303 Bilking a ghost, 416 bird in divination as to cause of death, 45 birds, souls of sorcerers in, 39 birth, new, at initiation, pretense of, 254 birthplaces, the dead buried in there, 160 birthstones. And birthsticks, Chiringa, of the Central Australians, 96 SQQ. Bismarck Archipelago, 70, 394, 402 black, mourners painted, 178, 241, 293, gravediggers painted, 451, snake people, 94 blackened, faces of mourners, 403 blood of mourners dropped on corpse or into grave, 158 square, 183, 185, and hair of mourners offered to the dead, 183, of pigs smeared on skulls and bones of the dead, 200, soul thought to reside in the, 307, of sacrificial victim not allowed to fall on the ground, 365 revenge, duty of, 274, 276 square, discharged by sham fight. 136 square Bogadium, in German New Guinea, 230, 231 Boigu, the island of the dead, 175, 184, 213 Bola Fagina, the Lord of the Dead, 350 Bolatu, the land of souls, 411 Bones of the Dead, second burial of the 166 square, kept in house, 203, worn by survivors, 225, disinterred and kept in house, 225, 294. Making rain by means of the 341 and skulls of dead smeared with blood of pigs, 200 Bonitos, ghosts in 380 Bullia, magic, 41 square born of an oak or a rock, 128 Bougainville, island of 393 Bullia District of Queensland, 147, 155 Bough, divination by, 241 breadfruit trees, stones to make them bear fruit, 335 Square breaking things offered to the dead, 276 Breath, vital principle associated with the 129 SQ. Brett, Reverend W.O.H., 35 SQQ. Bruin, an evil spirit, 45 Brittany, burial custom in, 458 brothers-in-law in funeral rites, 177 Brown, Reverend Dr. George, 48, 395 Bwandick, the 138 Buckley, the convict, 131 Budgenese, burial custom of the 461 Bugatu, 350, 352, in Isabel, 372, 379 Building King's House, men sacrificed it, 446 Bukawa, the of German New Guinea, 242, 256 SQQ. Bull roarers, 243, used in divination, 249, described, 250, used at initiation of young men among the Yabam, 250 SQQ. Among the Kayakaya, 255, at initiation among the Bukawa, 260 Square, associated with the spirits of the dead, 261, at initiation among the Kai, 263, 291, at initiation of young men among the Tami, 301, 302 Bilotu or Bulu, the land of the dead, for 62, 463 Bundle, the fatal, 472, story of 77 Square Bears, Fijian temples, 439 burial different for old and young, married and unmarried, etc., 161 SQQ. And burning of the dead, 162 Square, special modes of, intended to prevent or facilitate the return of the spirit, 163 SQQ. Second, custom of, 166 Square, in trees, 203, in island, 319, in the sea, 347 Square, customs of the Australian Aborigines, 144 SQQ. In Tumleo, 223, of the Kai, 274, of the New Caledonians, 326 SQ. 339 Square, in New Ireland, 397 Square, in the Duke of York Island, 403. See also corpse, grave grounds, sacred, 378 buried alive, old people, 359 Square Burma, 75 burning and burial of the dead, 162 Square bodies of women who died in childbed, 459 burns inflicted on themselves by mourners, 154, 155, 157, 327, 451 burnt offerings to the dead, 294 sacrifices, reasons for, 348 Square, to ghosts, 366, 367 Square, 373 burying alive the sick and old, Fijian custom of, 420 SQQ. People in their birthplaces, 160 Bushmen, 65 Buwan deities, 296 Kafirs of South Africa, their beliefs as to the causes of death, 55 Square Calabar, poison ordeal in, 52 California, Indians of, 68 calling back a lost soul, 312 common wind produced by weather doctors, 385 Square Cambridge Anthropological Expedition to Torres Straits, 171, 191 Canaanites, the heathen, 154 Canadian Indians, burial custom of the 454 Canarium nuts, first fruits of, offered to ghosts, 368 Square Cannibal feasts in Fiji. 446 cannibals fear the ghosts of their victims, 396 canoe, men sacrificed at launching anew, 446 Square canoes, Papuan, 220 Cape Bedford in Queensland, 129, 130, 131 King William in German New Guinea, 218, 238 Karnak in Brittany, 438 Catching Soul in a Scarf, 412 SQ. Cause, Hume's analysis of 18 Square causes, the propensity to search for 17 Square, 2 classes of 22 caves used as burial places or charnel houses, 330 SQQ. Celebes, Central, 72 Central Australia, Aborigines of, their ideas as to natural death, 46 Square, their ideas as to resurrection, 68, their belief in immortality, 87 SQQ. Their belief in reincarnation of the dead, 92 SQQ. Their attitude towards the dead, 124 SQQ. Cereals unknown to Melanesians and Polynesians, 408 Ceremonial impurity of manslayer, 229 Square ceremonies performed in honor of the Wolunqua, a mythical water snake, 108 SQQ. Dramatic, to commemorate the doings of ancestors, 118 SQQ. Funeral of the Torres Straits Islanders, 176 SQQ. See also dramatic ceremonies, dramatic representations, funeral ceremonies, totems chameleon in myths of the origin of death, 60 SQQ. Cams of Annam, 67 charms imparted by dead in dreams, 139 charnel houses, 221 square, 225, 328 cheating the devil, 460 Chepara, the 139 Cheramis of Russia, burial custom of the 457 Cherokee Indians, 77 chief, spirit of dead, a worshipful ghost, 352 chiefs power in central Melanesia based on a fear of ghosts, 391 chiefs deified after death, 369 chiefs authority based on their claim to magical powers, 395 chieftainship, rise of, 141 childbed, treatment of ghosts of women dying in, 358. Special fear of ghosts of women dying in, 458 SQQ. Childless women, burial of, 458 children, Central Australian theory of the birth of, 93 square, belief of Queensland natives as to the birth of, 128 children buried in trees, 161, 312 square, stillborn, burial of, 458 childstones, 93 square Chingpas of Burma, 75 Choi, disembodied human spirits, 128 Chukchansi Indians, 163 Chiringa, sacred sticks or stones, 96 SQQ. Circumcision as initiatory rite of young men, 233, among the Yabam, 250 SQQ. Among the Akikuyu, 254, among the Bukawa, 260 square, among the Kai, 290 square, among the Tami, 301 square, as a propitiatory sacrifice, 426 SQQ. Clans, totemic, 104 clay, widow's body smeared with, 223 cleanliness due to fear of sorcery, 386 square, 414 cleft stick used in cure, 271 clerk, FSA, de, 316 cloth and weapons offered to ancestral spirits, 430 square clubhouses for men, 221, 225, 226, 243, 256 square, 355 Cochinchina, 74 coconut trees of dead cut down, 208, 209, 327, stones to blight, 335 nuts tabooed, 297 Codrington, Dr. RH, 54 square, 344, 345 square, 353, 355, 359, 362 square, 368, 380 square Collins, David, 133. Commemorative and magical ceremonies combined, 122, 126 commercial habits of the North Melanesians, 394 communal houses, 304 communism, temporary revival of primitive, 436 SQ. Comparative and descriptive anthropology, their relation, 230 square comparative method applied to the study of religion, 5 square, in anthropology, 30 compartments in Land of the Dead, 244, 354, 404 competition as a cause of progress, 89 square conception in women, Central Australian theory of, 93 square. Belief of Queensland natives concerning, 128 conception of death, the savage, 31 SQQ. Concert of Spirits, 340 square confession of sins, 201 Congo, natives of their ideas as to natural death, 50, worship of the moon on the 68 consecration of manslayers in Fiji, 448 square consultation of ancestral images, 308 SQQ. Continence, required in training yam vines, 371 continuance of death, myth of the 472 contradictions and inconsistencies in reasoning not peculiar to savages, 111 square convulsions as evidence of inspiration, 443, 444 cooperative system of piety, 333 cords, 163 cord worn round neck by mourners, 241, 242, 249, 259, 361 corpse inspected to discover sorcerer, 37, 38, 53 square, dried on fire, 135, 184, 249, 313, 355, tied to prevent ghost from walking, 144, mauled and mutilated in order to disable the ghost, 153, putrefying juices of, received by mourners on their bodies, 167, 205, carried out feet foremost, 174, decked with ornaments and flowers, 232, painted white and red, 233, crowned with red roses, 233, 234, Stripped of ornaments before burial, 234, 241, kept in-house, 355, property displayed beside the, 397, persons who have handled a corpse forbidden to touch food with their hands, 450 SQ. Carried out of house by special opening, 452 SQQ. Corpses mummified, 313, of women dying in childbed burnt, 459 costume of mourners, 184, 198, 241 square, of widow and widower, 204 costumes of actors in dramatic ceremonies concerned with totems, 119 SQQ. Crabs in myth of the origin of death, 70 cracking joints of fingers at incantation, 223 creator, and the origin of death, 73 crocodiles, transmigration of dead into, 245 cromlechs, 438 crops, ghosts expected to make the crops thrive, 259, 284, 288 square cross-questioning a ghost by means of fire, 278 cultivation of the ground, spirits of ancestors supposed to help in the 259 culture, advance of, among the aborigines of southeastern Australia, 141 square, 148 square, advanced, of the Fijians. 407 cursing enemies, 370, 403, 404 cutting down trees of the dead, 208, 209 cuttings of the flesh in honor of the dead, 154 SQQ. 183, 184 square, 196, 272, 327, 359 dance of death, 185 SQQ. Dances as funeral rites, 179 SQQ. 200, masked, of the Manumbo, 228, masked, of a secret society, 233, at deaths, 293 square, of masked men in imitation of spirits, 297, at festivals, 316, at festivals of the dead, 321, at funeral feasts, 399, and games at festivals, 226 dark, ghosts dreaded in the 197, 283, 306, 467, female mourners remain in the 360 Dala, a ghost associated with the frigate bird, 376 Dawson, James, 42, 142, 143 dazing a ghost, 416 dead, worship of the 23 SQQ. 31, 328 SQQ. 338, seen in dreams, 27. Belief in the reincarnation of the 92 SQQ. 107, spirits of, associated with conspicuous features of the landscape, 115 SQQ. Reincarnation of the 124 square, 127 SQQ. Souls of the, supposed to go to the sky, 133 square, 135, 138 square, 141, 142, souls of the, supposed to be in stars, 134, 140, names of the, not mentioned, 135, magical virtue attributed to the hair of the, 137 square. Appear to the living in dreams, 139, 195, 213, 229, attentions paid to the, in regard to food, fire, property, etc., 144 SQQ. Property of, deposited in grave, 145 SQQ. Motive for destroying the property of the 147 square, economic loss entailed by sacrifices to the 149, incipient worship of the, in Australia, 149, 150 you feared, 152 square, 173 SQQ. 196 square, 201, 203, 244, 248, cuttings of the flesh in honor of the 154 SQQ. 183, 184 square, 196, 327, 359, thought to be strengthened by blood, 159, disposed of in different ways according to their age, manner of death, etc., 161 SQQ. Fear of the 168, germs of a worship of the, in Australia, 168 square, destruction of the property of the 174, land of the 175 SQ. 192, 193, 194 square, 202, 203, 207, 209 square, 211 SQQ. 224, 228 square, 244, 260, 286 square, 292, 299, 305 square, 307, 322, 326, 345, 350 square, 353 square, 404 SQQ. 462 SQQ. Personated by masked men, 176, 179 square, 182 square, 185 SQQ. Food offered to the 183, 211, 214, 232, 241, 332, 338, 348 square, 364 square, 367 square, 372 square, 396 square, 429, 442, 467, elements of a worship of the, in Torres Straits, 189, laid on platforms, 199, 203, 205, worshipped in British New Guinea, 201 square, prayers to the, 201 square, 214, 259, 288, 307, 329 square, 332 SQQ. 340, 376 square, 401, 403 square, 427, 441, names of, not mentioned, 210, 246, monuments of the, 225, offerings of hunters and fishers to the, 226, oracles of the, 235, buried in the house, 236, 347, 352, 397, 398, 399, offerings to the, 239, 276, 292, 298, transmigrate into animals, 242, 245, spirits of the give good crops, 247 square, elements of a worship of the dead among the Yabam, 255, spirits of the believed to be mischievous, 257, ancestors supposed to help in the cultivation of the ground, 259, first fruits offered to the, 259, buried under houses, 259, envious of the living, 267, 381, burnt offerings to the, 294, predominance of the worship of the, 297 SQ. Power of the, over the living, 298, 306 square, 307, sacrifices to the, 307, 338, wooden images, korwar, of the, 307 SQQ. 315, 316 square, 321, 322, buried in island, 319, festival of the, 320 square, medicine men, inspired by spirits of the, 322, spirits of the, embodied in their skulls, 338, spirits of the, identified with white men, 342. Buried in the sea, 347 square, 397, relics of the, preserved, 348, bodies of the, preserved for a time in the house, 351, represented by wooden stocks, 374, 386, burned in New Ireland, 397, carried out of house by special opening, 452 SQQ. See also Ghost dead kings of Uganda consulted as oracles, 151 death, the problem of, 31 SQQ. The savage conception of 31 SQQ. Thought to be an effect of sorcery, 33 SQQ. By natural causes, recognized by some savages, 55 square, myths of the origin of 59 SQQ. Personified in tales, 79 SQQ. Not regarded as a natural necessity, 84 SQQ. The second, of the dead, 195, 286, 299, 345, 350, 351, 354, attributed to sorcery, 249, violent, ascribed to sorcery, 268 square, myth of the continuance of, 472 death and resurrection at initiation, ceremony of, 431, 434 square, pretense of, at initiation, 254 SQ. 261, 302 death dances, 293 square, of the Torres Straits Islanders, 179 SQQ. Deaths from natural causes, disbelief of savages in, 33 SQQ. Attributed to sorcery, 136, 203, set down to sorcery or ghosts, 203, 268, 270 deceiving the ghost, 237, 273, 280 SQQ. 328 Deceiving the spirits, 298 Deification of the dead, 24, 25 of parents, 439 Deity consumes soul of offering, 297 Demon carries off soul of sick, 194 Demons as causes of disease and death, 36 Square demonstrations, extravagant, of grief at a death, dictated by fear of the ghost, 271 SQQ. Dean or Tina Indians, their ideas as to death, 39 Square departure of ghost thought to coincide with disappearance of flesh from bones, 165 Square descent of the living into the netherworld, 355 Descriptive and comparative anthropology, their relation, 230 Square descriptive method in anthropology, 30 Desertion of house after a death, 195, 196 N1, 210, 248, 275, 349, 400, of village after a death, 275 Deserts as impediments to progress, 89, 90 Design emblematic of totem, 168 Destruction of house after a death, 210 of life and property entailed by the belief in immortality, 468 Square of property of the dead, 174, 459, motive 4, 147 SQ. 327 Development arrested or retarded in savagery, 88 SQQ. Diary, the 138, their burial customs, 144 Differentiation of function in prayer, 332 Square disbelief of savages in death from natural causes, 34 SQQ. Disease supposed to be caused by sorcery, 35 SQQ. Demons regarded as causes of, 36 Square, recognized by some savages as due to natural causes, 55 Square, special modes of disposing of bodies of persons who die of, 162, 163. See also sickness diseases ascribed to ghosts, 257 Disinterment of the bones of the dead, 225, 294 Dissection of corpse to discover cause of death, 53 Square Divination to discover cause of death, 35, 36, 37 Square, 38, 39 Square, 44, 45 Square, 50 SQQ. 53 Square, 136, by liver, 54, by dreams, 136, 383, by the skulls of the dead, 179, to discover sorcerer who caused death, 240 Square, 249 Square, 257, 402, by bow, 241, by hair to discover cause of death, 319, by means of ghosts, 389 Square, to discover ghost who has caused sickness, 382 Divinity of Kings, 16, of Fijian Kings, 407 Square, Fijian notion of, 440 Square dog, in myth of the origin of death, 66, the heavenly, 460 dog sacrificed to the dead, 232, 234, sacrificed in epidemics, 296 Dorbay in Dutch New Guinea, 303, 306 Dragons supposed to swallow lads at initiation, 301. See also Monster drama of death and resurrection at initiation, 431, 434 Square, evolution of, 189 Dramatic ceremonies in Central Australia, magical intention of, 122 Square, 126, concern with totems, 119 SQQ. To commemorate the doings of ancestors, 118 SQQ. Dramatic representation of ghosts and spirits by masked men, 176, 179 Square, 180 SQQ. 185 SQQ. Drawings on ground in religious or magical ceremony, 112 Square on rocks, 318 Dread of witchcraft, 413 Square Dreamer, professional, 383 Dreams as a source of the belief in immortality and of the worship of the dead, 27 Square, 214, Divination by, 136, Appearance of the dead to the living in, 139, 195, 213, 229, Savage faith in the truth of, 139 Square, Consultation of the dead in, 179, Danger of, 194, The dead communicate with the living in, 248 Driving away the ghost, 178, 197, 248, 305. 306, 323, 356 SQQ. 396, 399, 415 Drowning of ghosts, 224 Duke of York Island, 393, 397, 403, 404 Dying, Threats of the 273 Years of corpse stopped with hot coals, 152, of Mourner's Cut, 183, 272, 327 earth burial and tree burial, 161, 166 square earthquakes ascribed to ghosts, 286, 288, caused by deities, 296 eating totemic animals or plants, 120 sq. Economic loss entailed by sacrifices to the dead, 149, entailed by the belief in immortality, 468 square eel, ghost in, 379 eels offered to the dead, 429 Egypt, custom at embalming a corpse in ancient, 178 Elysium, the Fijian, 466 square embryology of religion, 88 emu totem, dramatic ceremonies concerned with, 122, 123 Encounter Bay tribe of South Australia, 42 epilepsy ascribed to anger of ghosts, 257, 283 and inspiration, 15 Erdweg, Father Joseph, 218, 219, 227 Erskine, Captain J.E., 409. Art Nachalunga, Sacred Storehouse, 99 Erythrophleum Guineans, in poison ordeal, 50 Eskimo, burial custom of the, 454, 456 essence, immaterial, of sacrifice absorbed by ghosts and spirits, 285, 287, 374 Euhemerism, 24 square Euhemerus, 24 European teaching, influence of, on native beliefs, 142 square evil spirits regarded as causes of death, 36 square excitement as mark of inspiration, 14 exogamy with female descent, 416, 418 exorcism as cure for sickness, 222 square experience defined, 12, two sorts of, 13 square in intuition, 11 external world, question of the reality of, 13 square, an illusion, 21 eye, soul resides in the, 267 eyes of corpse bandaged, 459 feints ascribed to action of ghosts, 257, 283 faith, weakening of religious, for falling stars the souls of the dead, 229, 399 family prayers of the New Caledonians, 332 sq. 340 priests, 332, 340 famine, the stone of, 334 square fasting and mourning for a king, 451 square father-in-law, mourning for a, 155 favorable natural conditions, their influence in stimulating social progress, 141 square, 148 square fear of ghosts, 134, 135, 147, 151 SQQ. 158, 173 SQQ. 195, 196 square, 201, 203, 229 square, 232, 237, 276, 282 square, 305, 321, 327, 347, 396, 414 square, 449, 455, 467, a moral restraint, 175, the source of extravagant demonstrations of grief at death, 271 SQQ. Taboo based on, 390 square, a bulwark of morality, 392, funeral customs based on, 450 SQQ. Of women dying in childbed, 458 SQQ. Fear of the dead, 152 square, 168, 173 SQQ. 195, 196 square, 201, 203, 244, 248 of witchcraft, 244 the only principle of religious observances in Fiji, 443 feasts provided for ghosts, 247 square. See also funeral feasts feather money offered to ghosts, 374, 375 feet foremost, corpse carried out, 174 ferry for ghosts, 224, 244 square, 350, 412, 462 festival of the dead, 320 square fig trees, sacred, 199 fighting or warrior ghosts, 370 Fiji and the Fijians, 406 SQQ. Human sacrifices in 446 square Fijian islands, scenery of 409 square myths of origin of death, 66 SQ. 75 square Fijians, belief in immortality among the 406 SQQ. Their advanced culture, 407 fingers amputated in mourning, 199, 451 of living sacrificed in honor of the dead, 426 square Finch Harbor in German New Guinea, 218, 242, 262 fire as a means of keeping off ghosts, 131 flies, ghost says, 352 kindled on grave, to warm ghost, 144 square, 196 square, 209, 211, 223, 275, 359 supplied to ghost, 246 square, used to keep off ghosts, 258, 283, used in cross-questioning a ghost, 278 firstborn children, skull-topped images made of dead, 312. Firstfruits offered to the dead, 259, of canarium nuts offered to ghosts, 368 square, offered to deified spirits of dead chiefs, 369, offered to ghosts, 373 square, of yams offered to the ancestral spirits, 429 fish offered by fishermen to the dead, 226, prayers for, 329, ghost in, 379, totem, dramatic ceremony concerned with, 119 square, 121 fishermen pray to ghosts, 289, stones to help, 337 Fyson, Lorimer, 407, 412, 416, 418, 428 N1, 434, 435 SQQ, 438 N1, 445, 448 fits ascribed to contact with ghosts, 283. See also Epilepsy, Florida, one of the Solomon Islands, 346, 347, 348, 349, 367, 368, 376, 377, 379, 380 flutes, sacred, 221, 226, 233, 252 flying foxes, souls of the dead in, 405 food placed on grave, 144, offered to the dead, 183, 201, 208, 211, 214, 232, 241, 332, 338, 364 SQ. 367 square, 372 square, 396 square, 429, 442, 467, abstinence from certain, in mourning, 198, 208, 209, 230, 314, 360, 452, supply promoted by ghosts, 283, offered to ancestral spirits, 316, offered to the skulls of the dead, 339 square, 352, offered to ghosts, 348 square, of ghosts, the living not to partake of the, 355, not to be touched with the hands by gravediggers, 327, not to be touched with hands by persons who have handled a corpse, 450 square, and water, abundance of. Favorable to social progress, 90 square, offered to the dead, 174 fool in death, 83 footprints, magic of, 45 foundation sacrifice of men, 446 fowlers pray to ghosts, 289 frenzy a symptom of inspiration, 443, 444 square frigate bird, mark of the, 350, ghost associated with the, 376 frigate birds, ghosts in, 380 frog in stories of the origin of death, 61, 62 square fruit trees cut down for ghost, 246 of the dead cut down, 399 funeral ceremonies intended to dismiss the ghost from the land of the living, 174 square ceremonies of the Torres Straits Islanders, 176 SQQ. Customs of the Tami, 293 square, of the Central Melanesians, 347 SQQ. 355 SQQ. Based on fear of ghosts, 450 SQQ. Feasts, 348, 351, 358 SQ. 360, 396, orations, 355 square forces, impersonal, the world conceived as a complex of 21 foreskins sacrificed in honor of the dead, 426 square, of circumcised lads presented to ancestral gods, 427 Gabon, the 54 Gajos of Sumatra, burial custom of the 455 gall used in divination, 54 game offered by hunters to the dead, 226 Ganindo, a warrior ghost, 363 square gardens, ghosts of 371 Gazelle Peninsula, New Britain, 48, 69, 398, 405 Gilvink Bay, in Dutch New Guinea, 303, 307 genital members of human victims hung on tree, 447 N, 1 German burial custom, 453, 458 ghost appeased by sham fight, 137, hunted into the grave, 164 square, thought to linger near body till flesh is decayed, 165 square, elaborate funeral ceremonies designed to get rid of, 174 square, driven away, 178, 197, 248, extracted from body of patient, 271, calls for vengeance, 278, cursed and ill-treated, 285, who causes sunshine and rain, 375, posts, 375, seer, 204 square, 214, 229, shooter, 387 SQ. Ghostly fairy, 350, 412. See also fairy ghosts, mischievous nature of, 28, as causes of sickness, 54 SQQ. 195, 197, 222, 300, 305, 322, 389, feared, 134, 135, 147, 151 SQQ. 158, 173 SQQ. 195, 196 SQ. 201, 203, 229 square, 232, 237, 271 SQQ. 276, 282 square, 305, 321, 327, 347, 396, 414 square, 449, 457, 467, attentions paid to, in regard to food, fire, property, etc. 144 SQQ. Feared only of recently departed, 151 square, of nearest relations most feared, 153, represented dramatically by masked men, 176, 179 square, 182 square, 185 SQQ. Should have their noses bored, 192, 194 square, return of the 195, 198, 246, 300, carry off the souls of the living, 197, cause bad luck in hunting and fishing, 197, identified with phosphorescent lights, 198, 258, appear to seer, 204 square, of slain enemies especially dreaded, 205, of the hanged specially feared, 212, certain classes of ghosts specially feared, 212, malignity of, 212, 381, drowned, 224, village of, 231 square, 234, give information, 240, provided with. Fire, 246 square, feasts provided for, 247 square, thought to give good crops, 247 square, communicate with the living in dreams, 248, diseases ascribed to action of, 257, of the slain, special fear of, 258, 279, 306, 323, of ancestors appealed to for help, 258 square, precautions taken against, 258, expected to make the crops thrive, 259, 284, 288 SQ. Natural death ascribed to action of, 268, sickness ascribed to action of, 269 square, 271, 279, 372, 375, 381 SQQ. Deceived, 273, 280 SQQ. 328, thought to help hunters, 274, 284 square, in the form of animals, 282, help the living by promoting supply of food, 283, cause earthquakes, 286, 288, as patrons of hunting and other departments, 287, die the second death, 287, turn into animals, 287, turn into anthills, 287, of warriors invoked by warriors, 288, invoked by warriors, farmers, fowlers, fishermen, etc., 288 SQQ. Of men may grow into gods, 289 square, of the dead in the form of serpents, 300, driven away, 305, 306, 323, 356 SQQ. 396, 399, 415, cause all sorts of misfortunes, 306 square, call for vengeance, 310, 468, sacrifices to, 328, of power and ghosts of no account, distinction between, 345 square, of the recent dead most powerful, 346, prayers to, 348, of land and sea, 348, food offered to, 348 square, live in islands, 350, 353, live underground, 353 square, worshipful, 362 square, public and private, 367, 369 square, first fruits offered to, 368 square, 373 square, warlike, 370, of gardens, 371. Human sacrifices to, 371 sq. Incarnate in sharks, 373, sacrifices to, at planting, 375, sanctuaries of, 377 square, incarnate in animals, 379 square, envious of the living, 381, carry off souls, 383, in stones, 383 square, inspiration by means of, 389 square, killed, 415 square, dazed, 416, prevented from returning to the house, 455 square, unmarried, hard fate of, 464 ghosts and spirits, distinction between, in central Melanesia, 343, 363, regulate the weather, 384 square, of women dying in childbed. Special fear of, 458 sqq. Special treatment of, 358. See also dead in spirits giant, mythical, thought to appear annually with the southeast monsoon, 255 Gifford, Lord, 2, 3 girdle made from hair of dead, 138 Nanji, the, of Central Australia, 92 Godin story of the origin of death, 64 God, the question of his existence, 2, defined, 9 square, knowledge of, how acquired, 11 sqq. Inferred as a cause, 22 square, and the origin of death, 61 sqq. In form of serpent, 445, 462 gods created by man in his own likeness, 19 square, of nature, 20, human, 20, 23 sqq. Unknown among Aborigines of Australia, 91, often developed out of ghosts, 289 square, ancestors worshipped as, 340, 369, ancestral, sacrifice of foreskins to, 427, ancestral, libations to, 438, 2 classes of, in Fiji, 440 and spirits, no certain demarcation between, 441 Goldie, Rev. Hugh, 52 good crops given by ghosts, 247 square, spirit, 143 and bad, different fate of the, after death, 354 Gran Chaco, in Argentina, 165 grandfather, soul of, reborn and grandchild, 417, is ghost dazed, 416 grandfather and grandchild, their relation under exogamy and female kinship, 416, 418 grandidier, 49 grass for graves, euphemism for human victims buried with the dead, 425 square seed, magical ceremony for increasing, 102 grave, food placed on, 144, 145, property of dead. Deposited in, 145 sqq. Hut erected on, 203, of worshipful dead a sanctuary, 347, stones heaped on, 360, sacrifices to ghost on, 382 gravediggers, purification of, 314, secluded, 327, secluded in painted black, 451 graves, huts built on, for use of ghosts, 150 square, under the houses, 274. See also Hutt's Great Woman, the 464 Greek tragedy, W. Ridgway on the origin of, 189 Greeks, purificatory rites of ancient, 206 Greenlanders, burial custom of the 454 Grey, Sir George, 41, taken for an Australian Aboriginal, 131 sqq. Grief, extravagant demonstrations of grief and mourning, their motives, 135 square, at a death, extravagant demonstrations of, dictated by fear of the ghost, 271 sqq. Kriya Sutras, 163 ground drawings in magical or religious ceremony, 112 square groves, sacred, the dead buried in, 326 Guadalcanar, one of the Solomon Islands, 350, 372 guardian spirits, 227 Guyana, Indians of, their ideas as to the cause of death, 35 sqq. Their offerings to the dead, 165 gullet of pig sacrificed, 368 Gulu, King of Heaven, 78 Gypsies, European, burial custom of, 455 Haddon, Bacteriaceae, 171, 172 square, 175, 176, 180 Hagen, Dr. B, 230, 231 Haida, burial custom of the 455 hair birdish charm, 43, cut in mourning, 135, 320, 451, of widow unshorn, 184, of dead child worn by mother, 315, of grave diggers not cut, 327, used as amulet, 332, of the dead, magical virtue attributed to, 137 square, worn by relatives, 249. Divination by means of, 319, of mourners offered to the dead, 183, cut off, 183, 204 Hakea flower totem, dramatic ceremony concerned with, 119, 121 hands, gravediggers and persons who have handled a corpse not to touch food with their, 327, 450 square hanged, ghosts of the, specially feared, 212 hair and myth of the origin of death, 65 Harumi, a warrior ghost, 365 square Hasselt, J. L. Van, 305 Hori, a worshipful ghost, 372 headdress of gravediggers, 327 headhunters, 352 head of corpse cut off. In order to disable the ghost, 153, removed and preserved, 178. See also skulls heads of mourners shaved, 208, human, cut off in honor of the dead, 352 heaps of stones on grave, 360 hearts supposed to be the seat of human spirit, 129 of pig sacrificed, 368 heavenly dog, 460 Hebrew prophets, 14 hen in myth of the origin of death, 79 Highlands of Scotland, burial custom in the 453, 458 Hindus, burial custom of the 453, 458 historical method of treating natural theology, 2 square history of religion, its importance, 3 Hioyoa, the land of the dead, 207. Hole in the wall, dead carried out through a 452 SQQ. Holy of Holies, 430, 431, 433, 437, 438 Homer on blood-drinking ghosts, 159 homicides, precautions taken by, against the ghosts of their victims, 205 square, purification of, 206, honors bestowed on, in Fiji, 447 square. See also manslayers homeopathic magic, 288, 376 or imitative magic, 335, 336, 338 honorary titles of homicides in Fiji, 447 square Hood Peninsula of British New Guinea, 47, 202, 203 Hos of Togoland, their myth of the origin of death, 81 SQQ. Hos, CH, and McDougall, W, quoted, 265 N, 417 Hottentots, their myth of the origin of death, 65, burial custom of the 454 house deserted after a death, 195, 196 N1, 248, 275, 349, 400, deserted or destroyed after a death, 210, dead buried in the 236, 347, 352, 397, 398, 399, dead carried out of, by special opening, 452 SQQ. Houses, native, at Callow, 202, communal, 304 Howitt, Dr. A. W., 44 square, 139, 141 human gods, 20, 23 SQQ. Nature, 2 different views of, 469 SQQ. Sacrifices to ghosts, 371 square, in Fiji, 446 square Hume's analysis of cause, 18 square Hunt, Mr., his experience in Fiji, 423 square hunters supposed to be helped by ghosts, 274, 284 square One Gulf, in German New Guinea, 242, 256 hut built to represent mythical monster at initiation, 251, 290, 301 square huts erected on graves for use of ghosts, 150 square, erected on graves, 203, 223, 248, 259, 275, 293, 294 hypocritical lamentations at a death, 273 indignation of accomplice at a murder, 280 SQQ. Edu, Mountain of the Dead, 193, 194 square iguana in myth of origin of death, 70 Eileen, a worshipful ghost, 373 ill treatment of ghost who gives no help, 285 illusion of the external world, 21 images of the dead, wooden, Korwar or Karvar, 307 SQQ. 311, 315, 316 square, 321, 322, of sharks, 373, in temples, 442 imitation of totems by disguised actors, 119 SQQ. Of totemic animals, 177 imitative magic, 335, 336, 338, 376 immortality, belief in, among the Aborigines of Central Australia, 87 SQQ. Among the islanders of Torres Straits, 170 SQQ. Among the natives of British New Guinea, 190 SQQ. Among the natives of German New Guinea, 216 SQQ. Among the natives of Dutch New Guinea, 303 SQQ. Among the natives of Southern Melanesia, 324 SQQ. Among the natives of Central Melanesia, 343 SQQ. Among the natives of Northern Melanesia, 393 SQQ. Among the Fijians, 406 SQQ. Strongly held by savages, 468 immortality, limited sense of, 25, origin of belief in, 25 SQQ. Belief in human, almost universal among races of mankind, 33, rivalry between men and animals for gift of, 74 square, question of the truth of the belief in, 469 SQQ. Destruction of life and property entailed by the belief in, 468 square, in a bundle, 77 square impecunious ghosts, hard fate of, 406 impurity, ceremonial, of manslayer, 229 square imthurn, Sir Everard F., 38 square incantations or spells, 385 inconsistencies and contradictions in reasoning not peculiar to savages, 111 square inconsistency of savage thought, 143 Indians of Guyana, their ideas about death, 35 SQQ. Their beliefs as to the dead, 165 of Northwest America, burial custom of the, 455, 460 indifference to death, 419, a consequence of belief in immortality, 422 SQ. Indo-European burial custom, 453 infanticide as cause of diminished population, 40 influence of European teaching on native beliefs, 142 square initiation at puberty regarded as a process of death and resurrection, 254, 261 of young men, 233 in Central Australia, 100. Among the Yabam, 250 SQQ. Among the Bukawa, 260 square, among the Kai, 290 square, in Fiji, 429 SQQ. Insanity, influence of, in history, 15 square and inspiration not clearly distinguished, 388 insect and divination as to cause of death, 44, 46 inspiration, theory of, 14 square, of medium by ancestral spirits, 308 SQQ. By spirits of the dead, 322, by ghosts in Central Melanesia, 388 square, attested by frenzy, 443, 444 square and insanity not clearly distinguished, 388 insufflations, magical, to heal the sick, 329 in Tikioma, magical ceremonies for the multiplication of totems, 122 square intuition and experience, 11 invocation of ghosts, 288 square, of the dead, 329 square, 332 SQQ. 377, 378, 401, 441 island, dead buried in, 319 of the dead, fabulous, 175 islands, ghosts live in, 350, 353 olive pines, 325, 330, 337 Israelites forbidden to cut themselves for the dead, 154 Ivory Coast, 52 Jackson, John, quoted, 419 SQQ. 447 Japan or Jobi, Island, 303 Jawbone of husband worn by widow, 204, Lower, of corpse preserved, 234 Square, 236, 274, of dead king of Uganda preserved and consulted oracularly, 235 Jawbones of the dead preserved, 351 Square. Of dead worn by relatives, 404 Journey of ghosts to the land of the dead, 286 square, 361 square, 462 SQQ. Juices of putrefaction received by mourners on their bodies, 167, 205, 403 of putrefying corpse drunk by widow, 313, drunk by women, 355 Kachins of Burma, burial custom of the 459 Kafirs, their beliefs as to the causes of death, 56 Kagoro, of northern Nigeria, 28 N1, 49 Kai, of German New Guinea, 71, 262 SQQ. Theory of the Soul, 267 Kaikuzi, Brother of Death, 80 Kadish, 68, 158, 166 Kalu, in British New Guinea, 202 Square Kalu, Fijian word for God, 440 Kala Viu, root gods, 440 Kala Yalo, soul gods, 440 Kami, the souls of the dead, 297 square Kamilaroi tribe of New South Wales, 46. 155 Kanaima, 36, 38 Kani, name applied to ghosts, to bull roarers, and to the monster who was thought to swallow lads at circumcision, 301 Kaniat Islands, 401 Kava offered to ancestral spirits, 440. Kavarando, burial custom of the 458 Kayakai or Tujari, the of Dutch New Guinea, 255 Kayans, the of Borneo, 417, burial custom of 456 SQ. 459 Kemp Welch River, 202 Karamo, a fighting ghost, 370 Keys Ser, ch. 262, 263 Square, 267, 269 and 3 Kibu, the land of the dead, 175 Kabuka, war god of Uganda, 366 Kid, Dudley, 55 Kidney Fat, extraction of, 43 Killer of Souls, 465 Square Killing a Ghost, 415 Square King, Mourning for a 451 Square King's corpse not carried out through the door, 452, 461 Kings, Divinity of 16, Sanctity of Fijian, 407 Square Kintu and the Origin of Death, 78 SQQ. Kiwe, Beliefs and Customs Concerning the Dead in Island of 211 SQQ. Koita or Koitapu of British New Guinea, 193 Kalash Indians, 163 Komars, the 163 Koroi, honorary title of homicides in Fiji, 447 Square Korwar, or Karvar, wooden images of the dead, 307 SQQ. 315, 316 Square, 321, 322 Koryak, burial custom of the 455 Kosi and the origin of death, 76 Square knowledge, natural, how acquired, 11 of God, how acquired, 11 SQQ. Of ghosts essential to medical practitioners in Melanesia, 384 Kulin, the 138 Kurnai tribe of Victoria, 44, 138 Kwerebure tribe, 153 Quad, sacred or ceremonial ground, 179.